The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "You're fired." Lucas Ward stood frozen on the 60th floor of Manhattan's most prestigious tower, his calloused hands trembling at his sides. But billionaire CEO Vivian Cross wasn't prepared for what came next. No begging, no anger, just a quiet dignity that would shatter everything she thought she knew about power, about people, about herself. This is the story of a test that became something far more dangerous, a revelation. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Because what happened next changed everything. The elevator descended with the kind of silence that amplifies every racing heartbeat, every sharp intake of breath. Lucas Ward pressed his back against the polished chrome wall, his janitorial uniform still damp with cleaning solution, his mind spinning through impossible mathematics. $47 in his checking account. Mia's school trip payment due Friday. The electric bill already 2 weeks late. His daughter's face swam before his eyes, those bright, trusting eyes that still believed her daddy could fix anything. The elevator jolted to a stop on the 60th floor. Executive territory. A place Lucas had cleaned 1,000 times but never truly entered. Not like this. Not through the front door with his heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner begging for release. The text message had been brief, almost brutal in its efficiency. "Report to CEO office immediately. V. Cross." Vivian Cross. The name itself carried weight in Manhattan's financial district, spoken in boardrooms with equal parts reverence and fear. The youngest woman to ever inherit a Fortune 500 company. The Ice Queen, they called her. The billionaire who'd rather cut off her own hand than show weakness. Lucas had seen her exactly 3 times in his 2 years working night maintenance at Crosstech Industries. Once, she'd walked past him at 2 a.m. while he was scrubbing the marble floors of the executive wing. She hadn't looked at him, hadn't acknowledged his existence. He might as well have been another fixture, another piece of the building's infrastructure. The second time, he'd been emptying her office trash when she'd swept in unexpectedly, barking orders into her phone in that clipped, precise tone that could slice through steel. She'd gestured impatiently for him to leave. He'd complied, invisible as always. The third time had been different. It had been 4 months ago, during the Christmas party Lucas wasn't invited to, but had to work anyway, cleaning up after the celebration. He'd found her standing alone on her private balcony, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline with an expression that looked almost lost. Their eyes had met for exactly 3 seconds before her face had transformed back into its usual mask of cold authority. She'd turned away without a word. Now the elevator doors opened onto an expanse of floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into a constellation of dreams and broken promises. Lucas's worn sneakers made no sound on the pristine marble as he walked toward the massive oak doors of the CEO's private office. A receptionist with a designer suit and expression like carved ice looked up from her computer. "Mr. Ward?" The fact that she knew his name sent ice water through his veins. Janitors weren't supposed to have names. They were supposed to be invisible, interchangeable, forgettable. "Yes, ma'am," Lucas managed, his voice rougher than intended. "Go right in. Ms. Cross is expecting you." The office beyond those doors was everything Lucas had imagined and nothing he'd prepared for. The space seemed to stretch impossibly far, all glass and steel and ruthless efficiency. Abstract art worth more than Lucas would earn in 10 lifetimes hung on walls the color of storm clouds. And there, behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black granite, sat Vivian Cross. She didn't look up immediately. Her fingers moved across her tablet with practiced precision, each tap a small exercise of absolute control. Her dark hair was pulled back so severely it might have been painful, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face, a face that belonged on magazine covers and in cautionary tales about what happened when ambition consumed everything softer. "Mr. Ward." Her voice was silk wrapped around razor wire. "Sit." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Lucas sat in the chair facing her desk, a chair designed to make visitors feel small, insignificant, temporary. He folded his hands in his lap to hide their shaking, fixing his eyes on a point just past her left shoulder. A technique he'd learned in the army, back when he'd been someone different, someone with a future instead of just a past. Vivian finally looked up, and Lucas felt the full weight of her attention like a physical thing. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, beautiful and absolutely merciless. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. "No, ma'am." A small smile touched her lips, there and gone so quickly Lucas almost missed it. "You've been with Crosstech for 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. In that time, you've never called in sick, never been late, never filed a complaint. Your work is—" She paused, glancing at her tablet. "Exceptional. Your supervisor notes that you complete tasks 30% faster than your colleagues without sacrificing quality." Lucas's heart began to beat differently, not with relief, but with a strange, cautious hope that felt more dangerous than despair. "However," Vivian continued, and that single word dropped like a guillotine blade, "I've been reviewing our operational efficiency. Cost-benefit analyses. Return on investment." She set down her tablet with deliberate precision. "The mathematics are quite clear." She stood, moving around her desk with the predatory grace of someone who'd learned to command space simply by occupying it. She stopped directly in front of Lucas, looking down at him from what felt like an impossible height. "You're fired, Mr. Ward." The words landed like physical blows. Lucas felt them in his chest, his stomach, the base of his spine. He watched Vivian's face, searching for some hint of emotion, some crack in that perfect facade of executive indifference. There was nothing, just those ice-cold eyes watching him with what might have been clinical curiosity. This was where he was supposed to break. Lucas knew the script. He'd seen it play out in the break room, heard the stories from other workers who'd faced the same moment. Begging, pleading, listing family obligations, medical bills, desperate circumstances. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes executives enjoyed exercising mercy the way Roman emperors had enjoyed the power of the thumb. But Lucas had learned something in the rubble of Kandahar, in the hospital room where they'd told him his wife had 3 months to live, in the pediatric oncology ward where Mia had fought for every breath. Dignity was the only thing no one could take unless you gave it away. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. He met Vivian Cross's eyes directly, and for the first time in 2 years of invisible existence, he let her truly see him. "Thank you, Ms. Cross," he said quietly, "for the opportunity to work here, for 2 years of steady employment." He paused, his voice thickening despite his best efforts. "I know you don't care why I needed this job, but I want you to know you gave my daughter 2 years of stability, 2 years of me being able to say yes when she needed school supplies, when she wanted to join the art club, when she asked if we could get pizza on Fridays." Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered deep in those winter eyes, something that might have been surprise. "I have one request," Lucas continued, his hands steady now, his voice firm. "Please don't tell my little girl. She already worries too much. She's 8 years old, and she checks our bank account on my phone when she thinks I'm not looking. She counts the days until payday. She asks if we have enough money for food before she'll tell me what she wants for breakfast." His voice cracked, just barely, on the last word. He swallowed hard, fighting back the emotion that threatened to break through his careful control. "I'll tell her myself. I'll find the right words. I'll make sure she knows it's not the end of the world, even though—" He stopped, unable to finish the thought, even though it felt like the end of everything. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered with a million lights, each one representing someone with their own dreams, their own desperate mathematics. Vivian Cross had witnessed countless terminations in her 7 years running Crosstech. She'd inherited the company at 29 when her father had finally succumbed to the heart disease he'd refused to acknowledge. And she'd learned quickly that sentiment was weakness, that compassion was a luxury competitors would exploit without mercy. Her father had taught her that, had drilled it into her through a childhood that looked perfect from the outside. Private schools, European vacations, a trust fund that could buy small countries, but felt like a masterclass in emotional amputation. "The world will eat you alive if you let them see you feel," he'd said once, after she'd cried about a friend's betrayal. "Cut them out before they cut you, always." She'd learned the lesson well, too well. But this man standing before her, this janitor who should have been nothing, who should have begged and pleaded and given her the satisfaction of watching him break, he'd done something unexpected, something that cracked the carefully constructed armor she'd spent 36 years building. He'd thanked her, and then he'd asked her not to hurt his daughter, not to save his own job, not to spare his own pride, but to protect an 8-year-old girl from worry. "Mr. Ward," Vivian heard herself say, her voice strangely uncertain. But Lucas was already moving toward the door, his shoulders square, his head high. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the polished brass handle. "I hope," he said, without turning around, "that you never have to learn what it feels like to look into your child's eyes and tell them you failed. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even on someone who can destroy lives before breakfast without losing a minute of sleep." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded deafening in the vast office. Vivian stood frozen, staring at the space where he'd been. Her heart was pounding in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, almost forgotten. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them flat against her desk, needing the solid, cool surface to ground her. What the hell just happened? The termination had been carefully planned. A test inherited from her father's playbook, the great Gerald Cross, who'd believed that character was revealed only under extreme pressure. "Fire someone good," he'd told her once. "Fire them without cause. Watch how they react. The strong show dignity. The weak show desperation. And you, my dear, must always know the difference." So she'd chosen Lucas Ward, the perfect candidate. Reliable, hardworking, invisible. Someone whose reaction would tell her something about the backbone of her lowest-level employees. She'd expected anger or pleading. She'd expected him to invoke his daughter, yes, but as leverage, as manipulation. "Please, I have a kid. I need this job. How can you be so heartless?" But he'd done none of that. He'd thanked her. He'd protected his daughter even in his moment of disaster. And he'd walked away with his dignity so intact it had somehow stripped away a piece of hers. Vivian returned to her desk on unsteady legs. She pulled up Lucas Ward's employment file on her tablet, really reading it for the first time. Army veteran, Purple Heart recipient, honorable discharge following injury sustained in service. Wife deceased, cancer, 3 years prior. Single father to one dependent daughter, age 8. No disciplinary actions. Exemplary performance reviews. Lives in Queens. Apartment size, one bedroom, for a grown man and an 8-year-old girl. Vivian's finger hovered over the tablet screen, then moved almost of its own accord, pulling up the security camera feeds for the building. She shouldn't do this. It was an invasion of privacy, an abuse of her position. But her father had installed cameras everywhere, had monitored everything, and Vivian had inherited both the company and his paranoia. She scrolled back through weeks of footage, searching for Lucas Ward. There, arriving for his night shift at 11 p.m., a battered backpack over one shoulder. There again, leaving at 7 a.m. with that same determined stride. She fast-forwarded, looking for patterns, for something that would explain why this man's quiet dignity had rattled her so completely. Then she found it. A date 3 weeks ago. Lucas arriving early, at 9 p.m. instead of his usual 11 p.m. start time. And he wasn't alone. Vivian leaned closer to the screen, her breath catching. A little girl walked beside him, her hand dwarfed by his. She wore a backpack covered in butterfly patches, and her hair in 2 slightly lopsided pigtails. She couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, thin in the way that suggested not genetics but circumstance, her clothes clean but worn. Mia. It had to be Mia. Vivian watched as Lucas led his daughter to a small storage room near the kitchen facilities on the 3rd floor, a space that was supposed to be off-limits to everyone except maintenance staff. He settled her on a cushion made from cleaning rags, spread out what looked like homework on an overturned bucket, and handed her a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. The little girl ate slowly, carefully, making each bite last. Lucas worked nearby, mopping the floor with quick efficiency, glancing back at his daughter every 30 seconds like she might disappear if he looked away too long. Vivian's throat tightened. She scrolled through more footage from that night. At 2 a.m., Mia's head began to droop. Lucas stopped working immediately, gathered her into his arms with infinite gentleness, and let her sleep against his chest, while he continued cleaning one-handed, supporting her weight without complaint. At 5 a.m., he woke her gently, helped her pack up her homework, and they disappeared from the building's cameras, vanishing back into whatever life they'd built in that one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Vivian sat back in her chair, something unfamiliar burning behind her eyes. When had she last felt anything like this? The strange, uncomfortable ache that might have been empathy, or might have been shame, or might have been the long dormant recognition that she'd become exactly what her father had wanted, someone who could look at human suffering and see only numbers, only efficiency, only the bottom line. She'd fired Lucas Ward to test his character. Instead, he'd revealed hers. The intercom on her desk buzzed. "Ms. Cross, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Vivian touched the button. "Cancel it." A pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "You heard me. Cancel the board meeting. Reschedule for tomorrow." "But Ms. Cross, we're discussing the Q3 projections." "Tomorrow." Vivian released the button, cutting off her assistant's protest. She pulled up Lucas Ward's file again, staring at the home address listed. An apartment building in Sunnyside, Queens. She'd never been to Queens. In 36 years of living in Manhattan, she'd never crossed the bridge into the borough where millions of people built their lives without luxury, without safety nets, without the option to test other people's character because they were too busy trying to survive their own circumstances. Vivian closed her eyes, pressing her fingers against her temples. What was she doing? Lucas Ward was one employee among thousands, one termination among hundreds she'd authorized. Why did this one matter? Why couldn't she shake the image of that little girl eating her sandwich so carefully, making it last, while her father worked through the night to keep a roof over her head? Because, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded disturbingly like the girl she'd been before her father had taught her better. You saw yourself, not in Lucas, but in Mia, the child waiting for the other shoe to drop, the child who checked bank accounts and worried about money and carried weight no 8-year-old should have to carry. Vivian had been that child once, though her burden had been different. Not poverty, but the crushing pressure of perfection. Not hunger for food, but hunger for approval that never came. No matter how high she climbed, how hard she worked, how much of herself she cut away to fit her father's vision of worthiness. She opened her eyes, her jaw set with the kind of determination that had built empires and destroyed competitors. She'd made a mistake. She could admit that, at least to herself. The test had been cruel, and worse, it had been pointless. She hadn't learned anything about Lucas Ward that would benefit her company. She'd only learned something about herself that she wished she could unlearn. But there was a problem. The termination was on record. HR had been notified. By tomorrow morning, Lucas Ward's final paycheck would be processed, his benefits cut off, his security clearance revoked. The machinery of corporate termination, once set in motion, was nearly impossible to stop without raising questions, without looking weak, without admitting error. And Vivian Cross did not admit error. She couldn't. Not in front of the board members who'd bet against her from day one. Not in front of the executives who waited for any sign of the softness they were certain lay hidden beneath her ice queen exterior. She'd figure something out. Some way to undo this without destroying her carefully maintained reputation. Some way to help Lucas Ward without revealing that she'd been affected by his quiet dignity, his paternal devotion, his refusal to beg. But not now. Now she had to prepare for tomorrow's board meeting, had to review the projections that would determine whether Crosstech continued its aggressive expansion or pulled back to consolidate gains. She had to be the CEO her father had trained her to be, the woman who'd learned to transform every feeling into profit and loss statements. Vivian forced herself to open the quarterly reports, to focus on numbers and trends and market analyses. But her eyes kept drifting to the security camera feed that still showed that empty storage room on the 3rd floor, where a little girl had done her homework on an overturned bucket while her father worked through the night. And for the first time in 7 years of running Crosstech Industries, Vivian Cross couldn't concentrate on business. Because somewhere in Queens, Lucas Ward was going home to tell his 8-year-old daughter that everything was going to be okay, even though they both knew it wasn't. And Vivian had done that to him. She'd created that pain, that fear, that terrible moment of having to lie to your child to protect them from the harsh mathematics of survival. She'd done it as a test. The really horrifying part? Until today, she would have called it good leadership. The office felt suddenly suffocating despite its vast size. Vivian stood abruptly, grabbing her coat from the rack by the door. She needed air. She needed to clear her head. She needed to stop seeing Lucas Ward's steady eyes and hearing his quiet voice. I hope you never have to learn what it feels like to look into your child's eyes and tell them you failed. Too late, she thought, as she stabbed the elevator call button with more force than necessary. I already know exactly what that feels like, because every time she looked in the mirror, she saw her father's eyes staring back, cold, calculating, pleased with the monster he'd created. And for the first time in her life, Vivian Cross wondered if passing his test meant failing her own. The elevator arrived with a gentle chime that sounded almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Vivian stepped inside, her reflection ghostly in the polished chrome walls. She looked successful, powerful, untouchable. She looked exactly like what she'd always wanted to be. So why did she feel like she'd just lost something she'd never known she needed? The doors closed, and Vivian descended from her tower into the Manhattan twilight, carrying with her the weight of a decision that couldn't be undone and a conversation she couldn't forget. Somewhere in Queens, a father was walking home to his daughter, trying to find words for the unfindable, trying to be strong when strength had been taken from him by someone who'd never learned what it truly meant. And somewhere between the 60th floor and the ground, Vivian Cross began to understand that she'd been testing the wrong person all along. The subway ride to Queens took 43 minutes, but to Lucas it felt like descending through layers of failure. Each stop another floor deeper into a hell he'd promised himself he'd never return to. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows across the tired faces of fellow passengers, who'd also learned that promises meant nothing when the world decided to remind you of your place. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who watched Mia after school for $20 a week. Money Lucas could barely afford but couldn't do without. Mia asking when you coming home. She finished homework. Made her eat the sandwich you left. Lucas typed back with numb fingers. On my way. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. He stared at the words on the screen, at the lie embedded in their normalcy. As if this were just another day. As if his world hadn't just been dismantled by a woman in a corner office who'd probably already forgotten his name. The train lurched, and Lucas caught his reflection in the window, a ghost superimposed over the darkness of the tunnel. 34 years old, but looking older, the kind of weathering that came from carrying weight invisible to everyone else. The scar along his jawline from Kandahar, the circles under his eyes from 2 years of night shifts, the expression that tried so hard to project strength, but tonight just looked hollow. He'd kept it together in Vivian Cross's office, had maintained his dignity, his composure, even his gratitude. But now, alone among strangers who'd never know his name, Lucas felt the careful construction of his self-control beginning to crack. $47 in checking, maybe $300 in savings that was supposed to be untouchable, reserved for absolute emergencies. Rent due in 12 days, $1,800 for a one-bedroom apartment that had mold in the bathroom and heat that only worked sporadically, but was still the best he could afford in a neighborhood where Mia could walk to a decent school. The math was impossible, even with unemployment benefits, if he could get them, which wasn't guaranteed since he'd been fired rather than laid off. They wouldn't cover half his expenses. He'd have maybe 6 weeks before the eviction notices started. Maybe 8 if he could talk the landlord into patience he'd never shown before. Mrs. Chen wouldn't take less money, and he couldn't ask her to. She was 76 and living on Social Security, watching Mia out of kindness more than need for income. The school's aftercare program cost twice what he paid Mrs. Chen and closed at 6 p.m. anyway, impossible for someone working night shifts. Night shifts he no longer had. Lucas pressed his palms against his eyes, breathing slowly through his nose. Not here. Not now. He couldn't fall apart on the Q train surrounded by strangers. Couldn't let the panic take hold because once it started, once he let himself truly feel the scope of the disaster, he might not be able to stop. The train emerged from the tunnel into the gray twilight of Queens, and Lucas watched his neighborhood slide past the windows. Bodegas with hand-painted signs, laundromats where Mia liked to watch the clothes tumble while he folded their few possessions. The playground where she'd learned to swing, to climb, to laugh again after her mother died. Sarah. God, what would Sarah say if she could see him now? She'd been the strong one, the one with plans and backup plans, the one who'd kept them afloat when Lucas came home from deployment with a leg that didn't quite work right and nightmares that worked too well. Even dying of cancer, even in those final morphine-hazed weeks, she'd been making lists, organizing, preparing Lucas for a future she wouldn't see. "Promise me," she'd whispered, her hand skeletal in his, "that you won't give up, that you'll give Mia everything. Promise me, Luke." He'd promised, had sworn it on everything he'd ever believed in, and he'd kept that promise for 3 years. 3 years of double shifts and exhaustion, of sacrificing everything for his daughter's stability, her security, her chance at a childhood that wasn't defined by loss and lack. Now, in one 15-minute conversation, Vivian Cross had made him a liar. The apartment building looked worse in the fading light, its brick facade crumbling in places, graffiti half-heartedly painted over. But the security door worked, and the hallways were clean, and Mrs. Chen lived on the same floor, and those things mattered more than aesthetics when you were raising a little girl alone. Lucas climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. He could hear television sounds bleeding through thin walls, could smell someone cooking curry, could hear a baby crying somewhere above. Normal sounds, life sounds, the sounds of people who still had jobs to go to tomorrow. He paused outside apartment 3C, his hand on the doorknob, trying to arrange his face into something that wouldn't terrify his daughter, trying to find the version of himself who could still protect her, even when he'd failed at the most basic requirement of fatherhood, keeping them safe. The door opened before he could turn the knob. "Daddy!" Mia launched herself at him with the full force of 8 years old, wrapping her thin arms around his waist. "You're home early. Mrs. Chen said you had to do something special at work. Did you get a promotion? Did they finally make you a supervisor like you deserve?" Lucas's heart shattered into pieces so small they might never fit back together. He knelt down, bringing himself to Mia's eye level, drinking in the sight of her. Those brown eyes, so much like Sarah's, the gap-toothed smile, the butterfly clips holding back dark hair that desperately needed a proper cut from somewhere other than the kitchen with Lucas wielding scissors he'd watched a YouTube video to learn how to use. "Hey, Bug," he managed, his voice only slightly rough. "Let me talk to Mrs. Chen for a minute, okay? Then I'll make us dinner and we can talk about our day." "I already ate the sandwich," Mia said, a flash of guilt crossing her face. "Was I supposed to save half?" "I'm sorry, Daddy, I was really hungry, and—" No, Bug, you eat the whole sandwich. That's what it's there for." Lucas touched her cheek gently. "Go grab your homework. I want to see what you did today." Mia beamed and scampered into the apartment. Lucas stood slowly, his knees protesting, and found Mrs. Chen standing in her doorway across the hall, her face creased with the kind of knowing that came from surviving 80 years of watching the world break people. "Mr. Ward," she said quietly in her accented English. "Something wrong. I see in your face." Lucas opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. Mrs. Chen had been the first person to welcome them to the building 3 years ago, had brought them dumplings when she'd heard Sarah died, had never once asked for payment in advance when Lucas's checks were late. "I lost my job," he said simply. "Today. I'm going to figure it out, but it might take me a few weeks to find something new. I can pay you through next Friday, but after that—" Mrs. Chen waved her hand sharply, cutting him off. "You pay me when you can. Mia is good girl, no trouble. You are good father." She paused, studying him with eyes that had seen everything life could throw at a person. "My husband, he lose job 3 times. Once we have nothing, sleep in car with 2 babies. But we survive. You survive too." "Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to, but—" "You not asking, I am telling." She pointed a gnarled finger at him. "You take care of that little girl. I take care of watching her. We help each other. This is what neighbors do." Lucas's throat tightened dangerously. "Thank you," he whispered. Mrs. Chen nodded once, then retreated into her apartment, closing the door with a soft click that somehow conveyed both dismissal and solidarity. Lucas entered his own apartment, the space so familiar it usually brought comfort, but tonight felt like a cage. One bedroom that Mia had claimed, filled with her few possessions, books from the library, art projects, a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunks that had been Sarah's final gift. Lucas slept on the couch that pulled out into a bed, his clothes in a single duffel bag that had traveled with him from deployment to hospital to this small haven he'd tried so hard to make feel like home. Mia sat at the kitchen table, really just a card table with 2 folding chairs, her homework spread out with the meticulous care she brought to everything. Math worksheets covered in her careful handwriting, a reading log documenting the chapter book she was working through. "Look, Daddy." She held up a paper with a gold star sticker. "I got 100% on my spelling test. Miss Rodriguez said I'm the best speller in the whole class." Lucas pulled out the other chair, settling across from her with a smile that hurt his face. "That's amazing, Bug. I'm so proud of you." "I studied really hard," Mia said seriously. "I want to make you proud. I know you work really hard for us." And there it was, the knife twisting in Lucas's chest. His 8-year-old daughter, already carrying guilt that should never be hers, already aware of struggles no child should have to understand. "Mia," Lucas said carefully, reaching across the table to take her small hand in his. "You know I'm always proud of you, right? Whether you get 100% or 50%, whether you're the best speller or just learning. You don't have to earn my pride. You already have it." Mia's eyes got shiny, and Lucas realized with a start that she was fighting back tears. "But I heard you on the phone last week," she whispered. "You were talking to the electric company. You said you'd pay them as soon as you got paid. And I know my school trip costs money, and I need new shoes because my toes touch the end of these ones, but I didn't want to tell you because—" "Stop." Lucas came around the table, lifting Mia into his lap the way he used to when she was smaller. She was getting too big for this, all knees and elbows, but she still curled into him like she had as a toddler, her head tucked under his chin. "Bug, listen to me. Your only job is to be 8 years old, to do your homework and play with your friends and read your books. My job is to worry about money and bills and everything else. Do you understand?" "But Daddy—" "No buts. I'm the grown-up. That's how it works." Lucas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of the cheap shampoo they shared. "And you're going on that school trip, and you're getting new shoes this weekend. I promise." Promises. He was making more promises he didn't know how to keep. They sat like that for a long moment, Lucas holding his daughter and trying to figure out how to tell her the truth without destroying her already fragile sense of security. How did you explain to a child that the stability she'd finally started to trust was once again built on sand? But when he opened his mouth to begin, Mia spoke first. "Daddy, can we have pasta for dinner? The kind with butter and cheese?" Lucas nearly laughed, a sound that came out more like a sob he quickly converted into a cough. Pasta with butter and cheese. Their celebratory meal, their comfort food, the thing they ate when life felt okay enough to pretend they had choices. "Yeah, Bug, we can have pasta." While the water boiled and Mia worked on a drawing at the kitchen table, a butterfly, always butterflies since Sarah had told her dying people's souls became butterflies, Lucas's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but desperation made him hopeful. Maybe it was a job lead. Maybe someone had heard he was available. Maybe the universe had decided to throw him literally anything. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then a female voice, precise and cold. "Mr. Ward, this is Vivian Cross." Lucas's hand tightened on the phone so hard he heard the case crack. Behind him, Mia hummed while she colored, oblivious to the way her father's entire body had gone rigid. "Ms. Cross," he said carefully, moving toward the tiny living room for privacy. "I wasn't expecting—" "I've been reviewing your file," Vivian interrupted, her tone all business. "There were some discrepancies I wanted to discuss." Discrepancies. Corporate speak for, "I'm about to make your life even worse." "I see," Lucas said, though he didn't see it all. What discrepancies could there possibly be? He'd been a model employee, had never stolen, never lied on his time card, never done anything except show up and work harder than anyone else because he couldn't afford to be anything less than perfect. "You brought your daughter to work on November 3rd, Vivian said flatly. Lucas's blood turned to ice. Yes, ma'am. I did. It was an emergency. Mrs. Chen, the woman who watches Mia, she had a doctor's appointment she couldn't reschedule, and I couldn't find anyone else, and I couldn't afford to miss my shift. Mia stayed in a storage room. She didn't bother anyone. Did you log her presence with security? No, ma'am. I should have. I know that. That's a violation of company policy, Vivian continued, steamrolling over his explanation. Unauthorized personnel in restricted areas. It could have been grounds for immediate termination. Could have been. Past tense. Lucas's mind spun, trying to understand where this was going. I understand, he said quietly. But I've already been terminated, so... I haven't reported the violation, Vivian said. There was something strange in her voice now, something that didn't quite match the corporate ice. To HR. I haven't reported it. The pasta water boiled over, hissing against the ancient stove. Lucas ignored it. Why not? A long pause. Lucas could hear background noise on Vivian's end. Traffic, maybe. Car horns. Was she outside? Had the CEO of Crosstech Industries called him from the street? Because, Vivian said slowly, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep and painful, I watched the security footage from that night. I saw how you took care of her, how you worked one-handed so you could hold her while she slept, how you sacrificed your efficiency, your speed, everything you take pride in to make sure she was safe and comfortable. Lucas's throat closed. He couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. Mr. Ward, Vivian continued, and now her voice was definitely different, softer, uncertain, almost human. I made a mistake this afternoon. The termination was part of a... She stopped abruptly. It doesn't matter what it was part of. The point is, I was wrong. Hope flared in Lucas's chest, painful and terrifying. Hope was dangerous. Hope could destroy you worse than despair because it made you believe in possibilities that didn't exist for people like him. I want you to report to work tomorrow night, Vivian said. Same shift, same position, with a 15% pay increase retroactive to your hire date and a promotion to lead maintenance supervisor. The words didn't make sense. Lucas's brain couldn't fit them together into any kind of coherent meaning. Ms. Cross, I don't understand. I said I made a mistake. Vivian cut him off, and now there was something sharp in her tone, almost offensive. I'm correcting it, unless you'd prefer to decline the offer? No, Lucas said quickly, too quickly, hearing the desperation in his own voice and hating it. No, thank you, Ms. Cross. You won't regret this. I promise There are conditions, Vivian interrupted. You'll need to complete a background check update, sign some new paperwork, attend a safety training session, and if you ever need to bring your daughter to work again, you log it with security, properly. We'll create a protocol for childcare emergencies. Yes, ma'am. Of course. Whatever you need. Another pause, then, how is she? Your daughter? The question was so unexpected, so out of place coming from the Ice Queen of Manhattan Finance, that Lucas actually pulled the phone away from his ear to stare at it before responding. She's good. She's strong. Like her mother was. Good, Vivian said. That's good. She sounded awkward, like someone trying to speak a language they'd never quite learned. Report to HR tomorrow at 4 p.m. They'll have your new contract ready. She ended the call before Lucas could respond. He stood in his tiny living room, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to dead air and trying to convince himself he hadn't hallucinated the entire conversation. Vivian Cross had just called to give him his job back, with a raise and a promotion. Why? Daddy? Mia appeared in the doorway, her drawing clutched in one hand. The pasta's done. It's getting mushy. Lucas moved on autopilot, draining the pasta, adding butter and the precious packet of Parmesan cheese they'd been saving. He served Mia a generous portion, gave himself barely a quarter of what remained, and sat down across from her at their card table feeling like he'd stepped sideways into an alternate universe where impossible things happened to people like him. Daddy, you're smiling, Mia said, twirling pasta on her fork. Did something good happen at work? Lucas looked at his daughter, at her thin wrists and careful way of eating and the hope that flickered in her eyes every time she asked about his day. and made a decision. He wouldn't tell her about the firing, wouldn't burden her with his failure, even temporary, wouldn't add to the weight she already carried. "Something really good, Bug," he said, and watched her face transform with relief so profound it nearly broke him all over again. "Something really, really good." Across the East River, in a penthouse apartment that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, Vivian Cross stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows and stared at the lights of Queens glittering in the distance. Somewhere in that constellation of lives and struggles, Lucas Ward was probably telling his daughter they were going to be okay. Vivian had made the call from her car, parked on a random street in Murray Hill, unable to wait until she got home. Had pulled up his file and his number and dialed before she could second-guess herself into inaction. Now she felt something unfamiliar coiling in her chest, a sensation that might have been relief or might have been the beginning of something far more dangerous. She'd fixed it. She'd corrected her mistake. Lucas Ward would keep his job, would get his promotion, would provide for his daughter. Everything could go back to exactly the way it was supposed to be. Except it couldn't. Because Vivian couldn't stop seeing that security footage. Couldn't stop seeing Lucas working one-handed while his daughter slept against his chest. Couldn't stop hearing his voice. "She already worries too much." Her phone buzzed, a text from her assistant. "Board meeting rescheduled for tomorrow 9 a.m. Chairman Whitmore demanding explanation for cancellation. Please advise." Vivian deleted the message without responding. Let Whitmore demand. Let them all demand. She was the CEO, and if she couldn't cancel one meeting without facing an inquisition, what was the point of having power? She poured herself 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter her father had left her, along with the company, the expectations, and the emotional void that masqueraded as strength. The scotch burned going down, warming nothing. The apartment was silent except for the ambient hum of climate control and luxury. 3 bedrooms for 1 person. A kitchen she never cooked in. Art on the walls chosen by a decorator because Vivian didn't trust herself to know what she actually liked. Everything perfect. Everything empty. When had she last had dinner with another human being? When had she last laughed at something that wasn't calculated to demonstrate social grace at a corporate function? When had she last felt anything that wasn't related to profit margins and market share and the constant grinding need to prove she deserved her father's legacy? Vivian walked to her office, a smaller version of her Crosstech workspace, all glass and steel and implicit command. She opened her laptop and pulled up the security footage again. Couldn't help herself. Watched Lucas arrive for his shift with his daughter's small hand in his. Watched him settle her in that storage room. Watched him work with her sleeping against his chest. Then she did something she'd never done before. She tracked back further, pulling up weeks of footage. Watching Lucas arrive, always punctual. Watching him work with steady efficiency. Watching him leave every morning at exactly 7 a.m., rushing to catch the train that would get him to Queens in time to walk Mia to school. She found the footage from the night Sarah Ward had died, 3 years ago, according to the employment records. Lucas had requested emergency leave, had gotten it approved, had shown up for his next shift exactly on time with circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. She watched him work that night, his movements mechanical, his face blank. She watched him take his break in a bathroom stall where he thought he was alone, watched his shoulders shake with silent sobs he'd held back for probably weeks. Then she watched him pull himself together, splash water on his face, and return to work with the same steady competence he showed every single night. Vivian closed the laptop, her hands shaking slightly. What was she doing? Why couldn't she look away from this man's life, from his pain, from the quiet heroism of simply continuing to exist when everything had been taken from him? Because, the small voice whispered again, you recognize it. You recognize what it looks like to perform strength when you're breaking inside. You recognize what it costs to never let anyone see you fall apart. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Emotion is weakness. Care is currency. Never spend it on anyone who can't increase your value. Gerald Cross had been a genius and a monster, had built an empire and destroyed a daughter, had given Vivian everything except the ability to want anything beyond what he'd programmed her to want. She'd been 23 when she'd tried to quit. had told him she wanted to work somewhere else, build something of her own, escape the suffocating weight of his expectations. He'd looked at her with those cold eyes and said, "You don't get to quit, Vivian. This company is your inheritance and your obligation. Walk away, and you walk away from everything. I'll disown you completely. See how far you get without my name, my money, my connections." So she'd stayed, and when he'd died 7 years later, she'd inherited exactly what he'd promised, everything except freedom. Now here she was at 36, running a Fortune 500 company, worth more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, and the most meaningful interaction she'd had in months was firing a janitor and then realizing he was more of a human being than she'd allowed herself to be in years. Vivian's phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from the head of HR. "Received strange directive about Lucas Ward reinstatement and promotion. Please confirm this wasn't sent in error. Requires board approval for this pay increase." Vivian's fingers flew across the screen. Not an error. No board approval required. Falls within CEO discretionary authority. Process immediately. She hit send, then added, "And draft a company policy for emergency childcare accommodations. I want it on my desk by Friday." Let them question her. Let them whisper about the Ice Queen showing mercy. She'd survived worse than corporate gossip. The lights of Queen still glittered in the distance. Vivian raised her glass of scotch in a silent toast to a man who'd never see it, who'd probably never understand that his quiet dignity had accomplished something no board member or business rival ever had. It had made Vivian Cross question who she'd become. She didn't know if that was salvation or the beginning of a different kind of destruction. But for the first time in 7 years, she felt something besides numb ambition driving her decisions. And if that made her weak in her father's eyes, well, he was dead and she was still here. And maybe it was time to figure out who Vivian Cross could be when she wasn't trying to earn approval from a ghost. In Queens, Lucas Ward tucked his daughter into bed, reading her the same chapter of Charlotte's Web they'd read 3 times already, because Mia couldn't bear for it to end. When her breathing finally deepened into sleep, Lucas stayed sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, watching her peaceful face and feeling the impossible weight of gratitude. He had his job back, had a promotion, had enough money that he could buy Mia those new shoes without calculating which bills would have to wait, had enough security that tomorrow morning, when she woke up, he could tell her with honesty that everything really was going to be okay. And he owed it all to a woman he didn't understand. A woman who'd fired him with ice in her voice and rehired him with something that almost sounded like guilt. A woman who'd asked about Mia as if the answer actually mattered to her. Lucas didn't trust it, couldn't afford to trust it. People like Vivian Cross didn't do favors without expectation of return. Tomorrow he'd show up at HR, would sign whatever paperwork they put in front of him, would smile and say thank you and mean it. But he'd also be waiting for the other shoe to drop, because in his experience, good things didn't last, and miracles came with price tags you couldn't see until the bill came due. For tonight, though, he'd let himself feel the relief. Would let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had decided to stop kicking him while he was down. He kissed Mia's forehead gently and retreated to his pull-out couch, lying in the darkness and staring at shadows on the ceiling. Somewhere in Manhattan, Vivian Cross was probably in a penthouse apartment he couldn't even imagine, already forgetting the minor administrative task of reinstating one janitor among thousands. Lucas couldn't have been more wrong, but he wouldn't know that until everything changed again, in ways neither of them could predict. The city breathed around them both, indifferent, enormous, full of millions of stories that overlapped and diverged, and sometimes, against all probability, collided in ways that altered trajectories forever. This was one of those collisions. They just didn't know it yet. The photograph appeared on gossip site Cityscoop at 6:47 a.m., 17 days after Lucas returned to work with his promotion and his precarious new hope, still feeling like something that might evaporate if he examined it too closely. The image was grainy, shot from a distance with a telephoto lens, but clear enough to destroy everything. It showed Vivian Cross, unmistakably her despite the casual clothes so unlike her usual armor of designer suits, carrying a small child through the emergency room entrance of Mount Sinai, Queens. The child's face was turned into Vivian's shoulder, but the butterfly clips in her hair were visible. Distinctive. Damning. The headline screamed in tabloid glee, "Ice Queen's secret love child?" Crosstech CEO. Photographed with mystery daughter in Queen's Hospital visit. By 7:15 a.m., the story had been picked up by 3 financial news sites, each one speculating about whether Vivian Cross had been hiding a family, whether this explained her notorious privacy, whether shareholders should be concerned about undisclosed personal complications affecting leadership decisions. By 8 a.m., it had gone viral on social media, spawning 1,000 theories about the identity of the child, the father, and what this meant for Crosstech's stock price, which was already beginning to slide as traders reacted to uncertainty with their usual panic. By 8:30 a.m., Vivian's assistant was calling her every 30 seconds while the board of directors convened an emergency meeting without bothering to invite the CEO they were gathering to discuss. Vivian saw the article while she was still in her bathroom, hair wet from the shower, reaching for her phone to check her morning briefing. The photograph loaded on her screen, and for one long moment her mind simply refused to process what she was seeing. That was Mia, Lucas's daughter. The little girl with the careful way of eating and the butterfly obsession and the worried eyes of a child who'd already learned the world was dangerous. And Vivian was carrying her, captured in a moment of such obvious tenderness that it looked almost maternal, almost intimate, almost like exactly what the headlines were suggesting. Her phone exploded with notifications, calls from her assistant, from board members, from her PR team, from reporters who'd somehow gotten her private number. Text messages scrolling past too quickly to read. Email alerts pinging like a slot machine paying out disaster. Vivian sat down hard on the edge of her bathtub, water dripping from her hair onto the marble floor, and tried to remember how to breathe. That night. She remembered that night. It had been a Wednesday, 13 days after she'd reinstated Lucas. Vivian had been working late, as always, when her personal cell had rung with Lucas's number. She'd stared at it for 3 full rings, torn between curiosity and the instinct to maintain professional distance before answering. Ms. Cross. His voice had been ragged with barely controlled panic. I'm so sorry to call you directly. I didn't know who else. Mia's sick. She has a fever of 104 and she's not responding, and I can't get a taxi and the subway will take too long, and Where are you? Vivian had asked, already moving toward her private elevator, grabbing her keys from her desk drawer. Queens, Sunnyside. But Ms. Cross, you don't have to. Text me your address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She'd made it in 15, driving her Tesla like the rules of traffic were suggestions for lesser mortals. Had found Lucas on the sidewalk outside his building, Mia limp in his arms, her small face flushed with fever, her eyes glazed and unfocused. Vivian hadn't thought, hadn't calculated, had simply opened her car door and said, "Get in." The drive to Mount Sinai, Queens was a blur of Lucas's terrified voice trying to soothe his daughter, of Mia's small whimpers, of Vivian's hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel while she broke probably a dozen traffic laws and didn't care about any of them. At the hospital, Lucas had tried to carry Mia in himself, but she'd been dead weight in his arms, and he'd been shaking so badly he'd nearly dropped her. Vivian had reached out instinctively, taking the child from him, feeling the burning heat of fever through Mia's thin pajamas. I've got her, Vivian had said. Park the car. I'll get her inside. She'd run through those emergency room doors with someone else's sick child in her arms, had shouted for help with an authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms, had refused to let go until nurses had taken Mia from her with professional efficiency. Mia had been fine. A severe ear infection that had spiked a dangerous fever, but responded quickly to antibiotics. Lucas had cried when the doctor gave them the diagnosis, silent tears of relief streaming down his face while he held his daughter's hand. Vivian had stayed. She didn't know why. Should have left once she knew Mia was stable, should have retreated to her world while Lucas handled his. But she'd sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair in the pediatric emergency room and waited through the hours until Mia's fever broke and color returned to her small face. Thank you, Lucas had said when they'd finally been cleared to leave, Mia drowsy with medication in his arms. Ms. Cross, I don't know how to thank you. You saved her life. The doctor saved her life, Vivian had corrected, uncomfortable with the raw gratitude in his voice. I just drove a car. You answered your phone, Lucas had said quietly. When someone like me called someone like you in the middle of the night, you answered, and you came. That's not nothing. Vivian had fled then, making excuses about early meetings, retreating to her car with something painful and unfamiliar lodged behind her ribs. She'd driven home through empty Manhattan streets and hadn't let herself think about how it had felt to carry that sick child, to feel needed in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market share. She thought that would be the end of it, a strange private moment that would fade into the background of their separate existences. Now that moment was splashed across the internet with speculation and lies, and enough truth to make the lies convincing. Vivian's assistant, Jennifer, finally broke through the cascade of calls. "Ms. Cross, thank God! Have you seen—" "I've seen it," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the way her world was tilting sideways. "Who leaked the photo?" "We don't know yet. Could be anyone. Hospital staff, parking lot security, someone with a phone who recognized you. Does it matter?" "Ms. Cross, the board is meeting right now. Chairman Whitmore called it. They're talking about—" Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're talking about asking for your resignation." The words should have landed like bombs, should have triggered every defensive instinct Vivian had spent 36 years honing. But instead, all she could think about was Lucas seeing this article, about Mia seeing it, about how this lie, this distortion of a simple act of human decency, would affect them. "Set up a press conference," Vivian heard herself say. "This afternoon, I'll give a statement." "What kind of statement?" Jennifer asked nervously. "PR wants to issue a denial. Say the child is a distant relative, or a friend's daughter, or—" "No," Vivian interrupted. "No lies. I'll tell them the truth." "Ms. Cross, with all due respect, the truth is complicated. It makes you look involved with an employee. There are implications about judgment, about appropriateness, about—" "The truth," Vivian repeated firmly, "is that one of my employees had a family emergency and I helped. That's all. And if the board has a problem with that, they can bring it up at the emergency meeting I'm about to attend uninvited." She ended the call and stood, looking at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Still wet-haired, still in her robe, still technically the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, though for how much longer was suddenly very much in question. Her father would have known exactly what to do. Would have had PR craft a statement that was technically true but strategically misleading. Would have distanced himself from the employee in question. Perhaps even terminated him to demonstrate that personal feelings never interfered with business judgment. Would have sacrificed Lucas Ward without hesitation to protect the company's image. Vivian got dressed slowly, methodically, choosing her most severe suit, black, sharp-shouldered, paired with heels that added 3 inches of authority. Armor. She braided her hair back so tightly it pulled at her temples, applied makeup with the precision of war paint. In the mirror, she saw her father's daughter, the Ice Queen. The woman who'd built her reputation on being untouchable, unshakable, unmoved by anything as weak as human compassion. But she also saw, for just a moment, the woman who'd run through emergency room doors with a sick child in her arms and hadn't thought twice about it. The board meeting was being held in the executive conference room on the 58th floor, one level below Vivian's office, a deliberate choice designed to exclude her. When she walked through the doors without knocking, the conversation died mid-sentence. 12 men and 3 women sat around the table, all of them among the wealthiest, most powerful people in American finance. Chairman Whitmore, silver-haired and patrician, sat at the head with the kind of entitled authority that came from never being denied anything. He'd been Gerald Cross's closest friend, had mentored Vivian through her early years as CEO, and had never quite forgiven her for being better at the job than he'd expected. "Vivian," he said, not bothering to hide his irritation, "this is a closed session." "Not anymore," Vivian replied, taking the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. "I assume you're discussing the photo. Let's discuss it." Board member Patricia Chen, one of the few allies Vivian had cultivated, spoke carefully. "The concern isn't the act itself. Helping an employee in an emergency is commendable. But the optics, Vivian, the speculation, the market is already reacting. The stock is down 3%, another board member added, in 2 hours. Because traders don't understand what's happening, and uncertainty is poison." "Then we'll provide certainty," Vivian said. I'm holding a press conference this afternoon. I'll explain exactly what happened, who the child is, and why I helped. Absolutely not, Whitmore cut in sharply. The more you say, the more questions they'll ask. We need to minimize this, not feed the story. Patricia is right. A brief statement through PR confirming you helped an employee's sick child, no further details, and we move on. And what happens to the employee? Vivian asked quietly. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. You can't be serious, Vivian said, looking around the table at faces that wouldn't quite meet her eyes. You want to fire Lucas Ward because I helped his daughter. We want to minimize the association, Whitmore corrected. Look, Vivian, I understand you acted with good intentions, but this man and his daughter have become a liability. Every day he works here, every time someone sees them together, it reinforces the story. It keeps the speculation alive. So we sacrifice him to protect the company's image, Vivian said flatly. We destroy his livelihood because I made the choice to help his sick child. You made the choice to personally involve yourself with a subordinate in a way that created this situation, Whitmore countered, his voice hardening. That's on you, Vivian, but the board's job is to protect shareholders, and right now the fastest way to do that is to eliminate the connection. We'll give him a generous severance package, enough to live on while he finds other employment, maybe even a good reference. But he can't work here anymore. Vivian felt something cold and dangerous crystallizing in her chest. No. I'm sorry? Whitmore leaned forward, his expression somewhere between disbelief and anger. I said no. Lucas Ward is an excellent employee who did nothing wrong. I won't destroy his life to save our stock price. Then you're letting personal feelings compromise your judgment, another board member said, which is exactly what we were afraid of. My judgment, Vivian said, her voice dropping to the tone that usually made executives scramble to agree with her, is that we don't punish people for needing help, that we don't sacrifice employees to appease market speculation, that we have enough integrity to do what's right even when it's inconvenient. How inspiring, Whitmore said coldly. Unfortunately, inspiration doesn't protect shareholder value. Here's how this is going to work, Vivian. Either you terminate Lucas Ward immediately with appropriate compensation, or the board will call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership, today. The ultimatum landed like a physical blow. Vivian's hands tightened on the arms of her chair, her perfectly applied makeup hiding the way all the blood had drained from her face. You can't do that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. They could. The corporate bylaws her father had written gave the board that power if they could achieve a 2/3 majority vote. We can, Whitmore confirmed, and we will, if necessary. This isn't personal, Vivian. Your father would understand. Sometimes leadership means making hard choices. Sometimes it means sacrificing the individual for the good of the organization. Her father. Of course they'd invoke him. The great Gerald Cross, who'd built this company on the principle that people were resources to be utilized or discarded as efficiency demanded. Who'd taught his daughter that compassion was weakness and mercy was failure. Vivian looked around the table at faces that were already decided, already prepared to vote her out if she didn't comply. Patricia Chen looked pained but didn't speak up. The others looked impatient, ready to move on to the next item on their agenda once this unpleasant business was resolved. I need 24 hours, Vivian heard herself say, to handle it properly, to prepare Ward for the transition, to make sure his severance package is genuinely sufficient. Whitmore studied her for a long moment. 24 hours. But Vivian, if you try to fight this, if you attempt any kind of workaround, the board will take action. Are we clear? Crystal, Vivian said, standing with as much dignity as she could summon. I'll have Ward's termination processed by tomorrow morning. She walked out of that conference room with her spine straight and her head high, everything her father had trained her to be. Made it to her office before her legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, shaking with rage and shame, and something that felt horribly like grief. She'd caved, had agreed to destroy Lucas Ward's life to save her own position, had chosen power over principle in the space of a 20-minute meeting. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lucas. Ms. Cross, I saw the article. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should never have called you that night. Please let me know how I can fix this. Vivian stared at the words, at the man apologizing for needing help, for having the audacity to have a sick daughter, for existing in a way that inconvenienced the powerful. She thought about texting back, explaining what was coming, warning him so it wouldn't be a complete shock when HR called him in tomorrow, but her fingers wouldn't move. Because what could she possibly say? Sorry, Lucas, but helping your daughter means I have to fire you to save my job? Thanks for teaching me about human decency. Here's your severance check. The city stretched out beyond her windows, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, and Vivian Cross sat in her tower feeling more trapped than she'd ever felt in her life. In Queens, Lucas saw the article on his phone during his lunch break and felt his stomach drop through the floor. The photograph was damning despite its innocence. He remembered that night with painful clarity, Mia burning with fever, his own terror, Vivian Cross appearing like some kind of avenging angel and simply taking control. She'd saved Mia, had driven like a demon through Queens traffic, had carried his daughter into that emergency room with the kind of command that made nurses snap to attention, had stayed for hours in uncomfortable plastic chairs while Mia recovered, never once checking her watch or acting like she had anywhere more important to be. And now that kindness was being twisted into something ugly, something that would hurt her company. All because Lucas had been desperate enough to call her in the middle of the night instead of handling it himself like he should have. His supervisor found him in the break room, staring at his phone with an expression that must have looked as destroyed as he felt. Ward, the supervisor said uncomfortably, HR wants to see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Lucas looked up slowly. About the article. I don't know what it's about, the supervisor said, which was obviously a lie. Just be there. And Ward, maybe update your resume, just in case. The rest of Lucas's shift passed in a blur of automatic motion, mopping floors, emptying trash, cleaning bathrooms, tasks he could perform without thinking while his mind spiraled through catastrophic scenarios. They were going to fire him again. Of course they were. He was the liability now, the employee whose existence created problems for people who mattered. Vivian Cross had helped him once, had given him his job back in a moment of conscience or guilt or whatever had motivated her. But companies didn't protect janitors when protecting them cost money or reputation. He thought about Mia, currently safe with Mrs. Chen, oblivious to the disaster unfolding. Thought about the new shoes he'd bought her last week, the first time he'd been able to buy her something without calculating which bill would have to wait. Thought about how he'd finally started to believe they might be okay, might have found some stability in their precarious existence. Should have known better. Should have known that good things didn't last for people like him. When Lucas got home at 7 a.m., Mia was still asleep. Mrs. Chen was reading in her apartment, door open to listen for Mia waking. Lucas thanked her, promised to pay her this afternoon, and went to his apartment feeling like he was walking to his own execution. He couldn't sleep. Lay on his pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling while morning light crept across the room, and his daughter slept peacefully in the next room, trusting that her father would keep them safe. At 8:30, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, but Lucas answered anyway, some part of him hoping maybe it was Vivian, maybe calling to explain, to warn him, to do something other than remain a distant, powerful figure whose kindness had become his curse. Mr. Ward? A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. This is Rachel Kim from the New York Times. I'm writing a follow-up piece on the photographs of Vivian Cross with a child in Queens. I understand you're an employee at Crosstech. Can you confirm your relationship with Ms. Cross and the identity of the child in the photograph? Lucas's mouth went dry. No comment. Our sources suggest the child might be your daughter, that Ms. Cross drove you to the hospital during a medical emergency. Can you confirm that? I don't have anything to say to you, Lucas managed. Mr. Ward, the story is going to run with or without your input. Don't you want the truth to be told? Lucas hung up, his hands shaking. 2 more calls came in the next 10 minutes. Different numbers, different reporters, same questions. He stopped answering, letting them roll to voicemail while anxiety made his chest tight. This was spiraling. The photograph was bad enough, but now reporters were digging, connecting dots, turning a simple act of kindness into some kind of scandal. And Lucas was at the center of it, dragging Vivian Cross down with him. He should have handled it himself that night, Should have called an ambulance despite the cost. Should have found some other way instead of reaching out to the one person who'd shown him mercy and inadvertently giving her a target for this kind of vicious speculation. Mia emerged from her room at 9 a.m., rubbing sleep from her eyes, her butterfly print pajamas wrinkled. "Morning, Daddy. Can we have pancakes?" Lucas looked at his daughter, at her innocent request, her uncomplicated trust that breakfast would happen, that life would continue, that her father would keep protecting her from the harsh mathematics of survival, and felt something break inside his chest. "Yeah, Bug," he said, moving toward the kitchen on autopilot. "We can have pancakes." While Mia ate, Lucas's phone continued buzzing with calls from reporters, from blocked numbers, from people who wanted pieces of his story to feed the growing media frenzy. He turned it off eventually, unable to handle the constant intrusion. At 11 a.m., there was a knock on his apartment door. Lucas opened it to find a delivery man with an envelope marked Crosstech Industries, urgent legal document. His hands trembled as he signed for it. The man left without comment, and Lucas stared at the envelope with growing dread. This wasn't how HR usually communicated. This wasn't how they'd contacted him about his promotion. This was different, formal, final. He waited until Mia was absorbed in her coloring books before opening it, stepping into the bathroom for privacy. The document inside was brief and devastating. Notice of mandatory leave. Employee suspended pending internal investigation into conduct violations and policy breaches. Effective immediately. Not fired, not yet, but suspended, which was somehow worse, a limbo that kept him from finding other work while ensuring he wouldn't get paid, wouldn't have health insurance, wouldn't have anything except the slow torture of waiting for the inevitable. Lucas read the notice 3 times, trying to find some loophole, some way to fight this. But the language was clear, legal, unassailable. He was done. Maybe not officially terminated yet, but done in every way that mattered. A second page outlined the investigation, allegations that he'd violated company policy by bringing unauthorized personnel into the building, by using company resources for personal matters, by engaging in conduct that reflected poorly on Crosstech's reputation. All technically true. All things that would have been overlooked if not for that photograph turning his desperation into a scandal. He thought about calling Vivian, demanding to know if she'd approved this, if she'd agreed to throw him away to protect herself. But what would be the point? She was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He was a janitor who'd been stupid enough to believe mercy from someone that powerful could ever be anything but temporary. Lucas emerged from the bathroom to find Mia watching him with those 2 knowing eyes. "Daddy, is something wrong?" "No, Bug," he lied, the words tasting like ash. "Everything's fine." But Mia was 8 years old and had learned to read adult faces for signs of disaster the way other children learn to read books. "You look sad. Did something bad happen at work?" Lucas knelt down beside her, taking her small hands in his. This was the conversation he'd hoped to avoid forever. The moment where he had to tell his daughter that he'd failed again, that stability was an illusion, that the world was exactly as cruel as she'd always feared. "Bug, listen to me. You remember when I told you I got a promotion at work? How we were going to be okay?" Mia nodded slowly, her grip tightening on his hands. "Well, there's been some confusion. Some people misunderstood something, and now I have to take some time off work while they figure it out. It doesn't mean I did anything wrong. It just means things are complicated for a little while." "How long is a little while?" Mia asked, her voice small. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "Will you get fired?" The question was direct, cutting through all his careful euphemisms. Lucas couldn't lie to her, not about this. "Maybe. Probably. I don't know for sure." Mia's eyes filled with tears, and Lucas felt something in his soul crack clean through. She didn't cry often, had learned young that tears didn't fix anything, but now she sobbed against his chest while he held her and wished he could take every fear, every worry, every burden from her small shoulders. "I'm scared, Daddy," Mia whispered. "What if we can't pay rent? What if we have to leave? What if—" "Stop," Lucas said gently, pulling back to look at her tear-stained face. "Bug, I need you to listen to me. We might have to make some changes, might have to move somewhere cheaper, might have to cut back on some things. But I promise you, I promise, we will be okay. I will figure this out. I will keep you safe. Do you believe me?" Mia nodded, but her eyes said she wanted to believe more than she actually did. She'd learned that adults made promises they couldn't keep, that faith in tomorrow was a luxury children like her couldn't afford. Lucas held his daughter until her tears stopped, until she'd cried herself into exhausted sleep in his arms. Then he carried her to her bedroom, tucked her in with Mr. Trunks, and returned to the living room feeling hollowed out. His phone, still off, sat on the counter like an unexploded bomb. Lucas turned it back on and immediately regretted it. 23 missed calls, 14 voicemails, 37 text messages. Most were from reporters, but 3 were from Vivian Cross's number. Lucas stared at those messages for a long time before opening them. "Mr. Ward, I've seen the board's decision. This is not what I wanted. Please call me." "Lucas, I'm trying to fix this. Don't talk to any reporters. I need 24 hours. I thought you were different, and I failed to prove it. I'm sorry. This is my fault, not yours." Lucas read the messages 3 times, trying to parse their meaning. Vivian had tried to fix it. The board had made the decision. She was sorry. None of which changed the fact that he was suspended, that his income had evaporated, that his daughter was upstairs crying herself to sleep over fears she was too young to carry. He wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at Vivian Cross for involving herself in his life, for giving him hope, and then participating in its destruction. But all he felt was tired and defeated, and so deeply disappointed he could taste it. "I thought you were different," he'd told her that first day, when she'd fired him without cause. And for a brief moment, when she'd driven through Queens like his daughter's life mattered, when she'd sat in that emergency room as if she had nowhere more important to be, he'd believed maybe she was. Now, he knew better. Vivian Cross was exactly what she'd always been. Someone powerful enough to help when it was convenient and distant enough to watch him fall when helping became complicated. Lucas typed a response with numb fingers. "You did what you had to do. I understand. Don't contact me again. I'll handle this myself." He hit send before he could reconsider, then turned his phone off completely. Couldn't handle any more messages, any more intrusions from a world that had already taken everything it could from him. In her office, Vivian watched Lucas's message appear on her screen and felt something inside her chest that might have been her heart, finally breaking through the ice her father had spent 36 years building. "I thought you were different," Lucas had said. Past tense. Thought. As in no longer believed it. As in she'd proven him wrong in the worst possible way. She'd spent the afternoon trying to find a workaround, had consulted with her lawyers about board authority, about employment protections, about any possible way to fight the ultimatum without destroying herself in the process. But the answers had all been variations on the same theme. She had the power to protect Lucas Ward, or she had the power to remain CEO. Not both. Her father would have made the choice without hesitation. Would have sacrificed Lucas, kept his position, called it strategic thinking. Vivian had almost done the same, had agreed to the termination, had bought herself 24 hours to process it cleanly, had chosen her empire over one man's livelihood. But then she'd seen that security footage again. Couldn't help herself. Had pulled it up one more time, watching Lucas work while Mia slept against his chest. Had watched a man who'd lost everything continue to show up, continue to try, continue to protect his daughter with dignity and devotion that made Vivian's corporate victories feel hollow and meaningless. And she'd realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. She'd already failed her father's test. Had failed it the moment she'd answered Lucas's call that night. Had failed it every time she'd watched that security footage. Had failed it when she'd given him his job back, not because it was strategically sound, but because his quiet dignity had made her remember she used to be human. Trying to save herself now by sacrificing him would just be failing twice. Vivian pulled up her laptop and began to type, her fingers moving with the kind of certainty she usually reserved for hostile takeover negotiations. Not a press release, not a legal document, just words. Honest, unvarnished words that would probably destroy her career, but might, just might, save the thing that mattered more. Her reputation as the Ice Queen, her father's legacy of ruthless efficiency, the carefully constructed armor that had protected her from feeling anything real for more years than she wanted to count. All of it was already broken. Lucas Ward had broken it with his thank you and his request not to hurt his daughter. Had broken it by being exactly the kind of person Vivian had forgotten existed. someone who lost everything and still managed to be good. She could let that breaking destroy her, or she could let it remake her into someone worth the space she occupied. For the first time in her life, Vivian Cross chose the harder path. The words kept flowing, and with each sentence she felt lighter, freer, terrified in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the recognition that she was about to step off a cliff, with no guarantee of anything except the certainty that staying where she was had become impossible. Outside her windows, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere in Queens, Lucas Ward was holding his daughter and trying to be strong. Somewhere in a boardroom, powerful men were already planning her removal. And somewhere between the person she'd been and the person she might become, Vivian Cross was finally, terrifyingly, learning to choose truth over safety. Tomorrow would bring consequences. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Vivian went to sleep feeling like she'd done something that mattered more than profit margins, even if it cost her everything. The rain started at dawn, the kind of relentless October downpour that turned Queens streets into rivers and made the 40-minute commute to Manhattan feel like crossing an ocean. Lucas stood at his apartment window, watching water sheet down the glass, his reflection ghostly in the gray morning light. He hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep when his mind kept running the same impossible calculations, trying to find some mathematical solution to a problem that had no answer. His phone, turned back on reluctantly at 6 a.m. because avoiding reality didn't change it, showed 17 new messages. More reporters. A few from concerned coworkers who'd somehow gotten his number. One from his landlord, brief and ominous. Heard you lost your job. Rent still due on time. News traveled fast in their building. Mrs. Chen had probably mentioned seeing Lucas home during work hours, and in a place where everyone knew everyone's business because survival sometimes depended on it, speculation became fact within hours. Lucas was composing a response to his landlord, something about having savings, about this being temporary, lies that felt necessary, when a knock sounded at his door. Too early for Mrs. Chen, too early for anyone except disaster wearing a different face. He opened the door to find a woman in an expensive raincoat, water dripping from her umbrella, her face familiar in the way of someone he'd seen on television or in newspapers but never expected to encounter in his third-floor walk-up in Queens. Mr. Ward, she said, extending a hand. I'm Patricia Chen. I'm on the board of directors at Crosstech Industries. May I come in? Lucas's first instinct was to close the door. His second was to demand what the hell she thought she was doing showing up at his home. His third, the one he acted on, was to step aside and let her enter, because when powerful people appeared in your life uninvited, refusing them rarely made things better. Patricia stepped into his small living room, her designer shoes leaving wet prints on the worn linoleum. She looked around with an expression that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't quite neutral either, taking in the pull-out couch, the card table, the apartment that announced poverty without Lucas having to say a word. I apologize for the early hour, Patricia said, setting her umbrella by the door with careful precision, and for the intrusion. But I needed to speak with you before the board meeting at 9, and I couldn't risk this conversation being overheard. The board meeting where you decide whether to fire me officially instead of just suspending me? Lucas asked, his voice flat. You could have saved yourself the trip. I already know how this ends. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Mr. Ward, do you know what Vivian Cross did last night? Lucas shook his head, trying to ignore the way his heart stuttered at Vivian's name. She wrote a statement, Patricia continued. Not a press release, not a legal defense, a personal statement taking full responsibility for the photograph, for the speculation, for everything. She detailed exactly what happened that night, your daughter's illness, her decision to help, the emergency room, all of it. She explained that you're a single father, a veteran, an exemplary employee who did nothing wrong except have a medical emergency and call someone who'd shown you kindness. Lucas's throat tightened. That doesn't change anything. The board still wants me gone. The board, Patricia said carefully, wants the scandal contained, but Vivian's statement does something they didn't anticipate. It makes you sympathetic. It makes firing you look cruel. And more importantly, it makes Vivian look human in a way that's actually helping the stock recover. Lucas stared at her, trying to process this information. The stock is recovering? Up 2% since her statement posted at midnight, Patricia confirmed. Turns out people respond well to a CEO who acts like she cares about her employees. Social media is calling her a hero. The narrative has completely shifted. So you're here to tell me I get to keep my job because it's good PR? Lucas asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. I'm here, Patricia said, meeting his eyes directly, to tell you that Vivian Cross is about to walk into a board meeting and resign. She's going to step down as CEO rather than agree to terminate you. The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. He sat down hard on his couch bed, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. She's what? The board gave her an ultimatum yesterday. Fire you or face a vote of no confidence. She agreed initially, bought herself 24 hours to handle it quietly. But instead of firing you, she spent the night writing that statement and preparing her resignation. She's choosing to protect you, even if it costs her everything. Lucas's mind spun, trying to fit this information into any kind of coherent framework. Vivian Cross, the Ice Queen, the billionaire CEO who could buy and sell people like him without blinking, was throwing away her career. For him. For a janitor she barely knew. Why are you telling me this? He managed. Patricia moved to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street. Because I've known Vivian since she was 23 years old. Watched her fight to prove herself. Watched her become exactly what her father wanted. Brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. And I've watched that transformation cost her everything that makes life worth living. She has no friends, Mr. Ward. No relationships. No life outside Crosstech. Nothing except the company and the burden of living up to a dead man's expectations. She turned back to face him. And then you happened. I don't know what exactly you said to her the day she fired you, but something changed. She started questioning things, started looking at security footage of employees she'd never noticed before, started asking questions about childcare policies and emergency protocols, started acting like the person I thought she could be before her father ground all the softness out of her. I didn't ask for any of this, Lucas said quietly. I know, Patricia replied. That's why it matters. You didn't ask for mercy or special treatment. You just existed with dignity, and somehow that was enough to crack through 30 years of conditioning. She paused. Vivian is making a mistake by resigning. She's a good CEO, great even. The company needs her. But she's so convinced that choosing you over the board's ultimatum makes her weak that she can't see there might be another option. What option? Lucas asked, though he already suspected where this was going. The board wants you gone to protect their reputation. But what if your staying protects the company better than your leaving? What if firing you now, after Vivian's statement, after the public sympathy, would cause more damage than keeping you? Patricia pulled a folder from her briefcase, setting it on Lucas's card table. That's a new contract. Lead maintenance supervisor, as previously agreed, with a 25% raise instead of 15%. Full benefits. Guaranteed employment for 2 years with no termination except for documented cause. Lucas stared at the folder like it might explode. The board would never agree to this. 3 board members, including myself, are prepared to vote against Whitmore's ultimatum. That's enough to block the no-confidence vote. But we need Vivian to fight for you instead of falling on her sword. And I think the only person who can convince her to stay is you. Me? Lucas nearly laughed at the absurdity. Ms. Chen, I'm a janitor from Queens. Vivian Cross doesn't care what I think. She cares enough to destroy her career to protect you, Patricia countered. She cares enough that she spent 3 hours last night writing a statement that was essentially a confession of having feelings, of being human, of caring about something besides profit margins. The Vivian I've known for 13 years would never have done that, which means you have more influence over her than you realize. Lucas looked at the contract, then at Patricia Chen, trying to understand what was really being asked of him. You want me to go to Manhattan, to walk into a board meeting where I don't belong, to convince a billionaire CEO not to resign because some janitor thinks she should stay. I want you to go, Patricia said quietly, and tell her the truth, whatever that truth is. Whether you're angry at her for getting you into this mess, or grateful that she's trying to protect you, or confused about why any of this matters, just be honest with her. Be the person who wouldn't beg when she fired you. Be the man who thanked her even when you had every right to hate her. She headed toward the door, then paused. The board meeting starts at 9. That gives you 2.5 hours to get to Manhattan. There's a car waiting downstairs. My driver will take you. The choice is yours, Mr. Ward. But make it knowing that Vivian Cross is about to sacrifice everything she spent her entire life building because she finally found something she values more. Don't let her do that without at least talking to her first. Patricia left, taking her umbrella and her impossible request with her. Lucas sat in his apartment listening to rain hammer against windows and the sound of Mia beginning to stir in her bedroom. He looked at the contract, at the words that promised stability, security, everything he'd been desperate for. All he had to do was nothing. Let Vivian resign, take the new position under whoever replaced her, move on with his life. Except he couldn't. Because Patricia was right. Something had shifted between him and Vivian Cross, something that transcended the power differential and the absurdity of a janitor mattering to a CEO. She'd seen him, really seen him, in ways that went beyond his job title or his circumstances. And he'd seen her too, in that emergency room, watching her transform from Ice Queen to just a woman who stayed with a sick child because it was the right thing to do. Mia appeared in the doorway, Mr. Trunks clutched under one arm, her hair a mess of tangles. "Daddy? I heard talking. Is someone here?" Lucas crossed to his daughter, kneeling down to her level. "Bug, I need to go into the city for a few hours. Something important came up with work." "Are they going to fire you?" Mia asked, that terrible directness that children learned when they stopped being able to afford illusions. "I don't know," Lucas admitted. "But I'm going to try to fix this. Can you stay with Mrs. Chen? I'll be back before lunch." Mia nodded, but her eyes were worried. Lucas hugged her tight, breathing in strawberry shampoo and childhood, trying to give her some certainty when he had none to spare. 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in his only suit, bought at Goodwill 3 years ago for Sarah's funeral, Lucas climbed into a black town car that probably cost more than his annual salary. The driver, professional and silent, navigated Queens traffic with practiced ease, while Lucas watched the city slide past rain-streaked windows. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Good luck. You're doing the right thing. Patricia Chen." Lucas almost laughed. The right thing. As if right and wrong were clear categories instead of murky territories where desperation and dignity got tangled up with other people's power games. Manhattan rose before them like a fortress of glass and steel, each building a monument to ambitions that had nothing to do with people like Lucas. The town car pulled up to Crosstech Tower at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes until the board meeting started. 13 minutes to figure out what the hell he was going to say to a woman who was throwing away her empire because of him. Security in the lobby recognized him, or maybe Patricia had called ahead, because they waved him through without question. The elevator ride to the 58th floor felt simultaneously too fast and too slow. Lucas's reflection in the chrome walls showing a man who looked completely out of place in this world of corporate power. The executive reception area was empty except for Jennifer, Vivian's assistant, who looked up from her computer with obvious surprise. "Mr. Ward, I wasn't expecting... Does Ms. Cross know you're here?" "No," Lucas said. "Is the board meeting about to start?" Jennifer confirmed, checking her watch. "But, Mr. Ward, you can't just..." "I need to see her," Lucas interrupted, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "Please, before she does something she can't take back." Jennifer studied him for a long moment, some internal calculation playing out behind her eyes. Then she stood, moving toward the massive oak doors of the CEO's office. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you before they come looking for her. She knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. "Miss Cross? You have a visitor." Lucas stepped into Vivian's office, the space he'd cleaned countless times but never truly entered. Vivian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to the door, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from preparing to face execution with dignity. She turned slowly, and when her eyes found Lucas, her carefully composed expression cracked just slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Patricia Chen came to see me this morning," Lucas said, the words tumbling out before he could plan them. "She told me what you're planning to do, the resignation." "Patricia had no right," Vivian began, then stopped, pressing her lips together. "It doesn't matter. The board meets in 10 minutes. My decision is made. You're giving up your company. Lucas said. Your whole life, because of me. Because you helped my daughter. Because I chose to get involved, Vivian corrected, her voice sharp. Because I made decisions that created this situation. And because I'm tired, Lucas, tired of being the person my father created, tired of sacrificing people to protect corporate interests, tired of living in a cage made of money and power and absolute emptiness. The use of his first name hit Lucas like electricity. She'd never called him anything but Mr. Ward before, maintaining that professional distance even when she was driving through Queens to save his daughter. So you're going to resign, Lucas said. Throw away everything you've built. And then what? You think that fixes anything? It fixes you, Vivian replied, turning back to the window. You keep your job. Your daughter keeps her stability. The board gets what they want without having to fire someone who did nothing wrong. Everyone wins. Except you, Lucas said. You lose everything. I lost everything worth having a long time ago, Vivian said quietly. I'm just finally admitting it. Lucas moved closer, into her space, forcing her to look at him. That night in the emergency room when Mia's fever finally broke and the doctor said she'd be fine, do you remember what you did? Vivian's jaw tightened. I don't... You smiled, Lucas interrupted. Not that corporate smile you use in meetings, a real smile. Like you were actually relieved that a little girl you barely knew was going to be okay. Like it mattered to you. Not because of PR or optics or corporate image, but because somewhere under all that ice, you're still human enough to care when a child stops suffering. Lucas, I was wrong, he continued, the words coming faster now, urgent. When I told you I thought you were different, I was wrong because you are different. Not from what I hoped, from what you've convinced yourself you have to be. You're not your father, Vivian, and destroying your career to protect me doesn't prove you're good. It just proves you still don't know how to fight for yourself. Vivian's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. What do you want me to do? Go into that board meeting and tell them I refuse? Watch them vote me out anyway? At least this way I leave with some dignity. Dignity, Lucas repeated, tasting the word. That's what you told me I had when you fired me the first time. When I thanked you and walked away instead of begging. You know what that dignity cost me? Everything. Because I was so busy being dignified, I didn't fight for what I needed. For what my daughter needed. He pulled the contract from his jacket pocket, the papers Patricia had left him, and set them on Vivian's desk. 3 board members are prepared to vote against Whitmore. Patricia says that's enough to block the no-confidence vote. But they need you to actually fight instead of surrendering before the battle starts. Vivian stared at the contract, her hands clenched at her sides. And if we fight and lose, if they vote me out anyway, then I've dragged this out, made it uglier, and you still end up fired. Then at least we tried, Lucas said. At least we stood up and said that doing the right thing matters more than protecting our reputations. At least we showed your father's ghost that his way isn't the only way. My father, Vivian's voice broke slightly. My father would say I'm destroying his legacy, everything he built, everything he's sacrificed for. Your father, Lucas said gently, sacrificed you. Turned his daughter into a weapon instead of a person. And now you're so convinced that feeling anything makes you weak that you'd rather fall on your sword than let yourself fight for something that actually matters. Vivian's composure finally cracked. She sank into her desk chair, pressing her hands over her face. I don't know how to do this, Lucas. I don't know how to be the person who fights for principle over profit. I've spent 36 years learning the opposite. Learning that people are resources, that sentiment is weakness, that caring is the fastest way to lose. Well, Lucas pulled over a chair, sitting across from her. Equal height now, equal ground, at least metaphorically. Then learn something new. You learned how to run a Fortune 500 company. You can learn how to be human again. What if I'm not good at it? Vivian asked, her voice small. What if I try to fight and I'm still just my father's daughter, making everything worse? Then you fail, Lucas said simply, and you get back up and try again. That's what the rest of us do. We fail and survive and keep trying because we don't have the luxury of giving up. A knock at the door interrupted them, Jennifer's voice apologetic but firm. Ms. Cross? The board is waiting. Vivian looked at Lucas, her expression raw in a way he suspected few people ever saw. If I fight this and lose, you lose too. Your job, your stability, everything. Are you willing to risk that? I've already lost everything worth losing, Lucas said, echoing her earlier words back to her. My wife, my health, my illusions about how the world works. But I still have my daughter, and I still have enough stubborn hope to believe that sometimes good people can win, even when the odds are terrible. You're insane, Vivian said, but something like a smile touched her lips. Probably, Lucas agreed. But I'm the insane janitor who somehow convinced a billionaire CEO that she might be worth saving. So maybe insanity is what we need right now. Vivian stood slowly, straightening her suit jacket with hands that only trembled slightly. If we do this, it gets worse before it gets better. Whitmore won't back down easily. The press will have a field day. Your life becomes even more of a circus. Already is a circus, Lucas said, standing with her. Might as well be a circus with a purpose. They walked together toward the conference room, an odd pair, the CEO in her designer suit and the janitor in his Goodwill special. Jennifer watched them pass with something like hope in her eyes, and Lucas wondered how long she'd been waiting for Vivian Cross to become someone worth hoping for. The conference room fell silent when they entered. 12 men and 3 women turned to stare, their expressions ranging from surprise to irritation to, in Patricia Chen's case, carefully concealed satisfaction. Chairman Whitmore stood, his face darkening. Vivian, we agreed you'd submit your resignation this morning. What is this? This is me reconsidering, Vivian said, her voice steady now, channeling that command that could make executives scramble. And this is Lucas Ward, the employee you want me to fire to protect your comfort. This is highly inappropriate, another board member sputtered. You can't bring a subordinate into a closed board meeting. I can bring anyone I want into any meeting I choose to attend, Vivian interrupted coldly. I'm still CEO, and I'm not resigning. Furthermore, I'm not terminating Mr. Ward. If you want either of those things to happen, you'll have to vote me out. But I'm going to make that vote as uncomfortable as possible. Whitmore's face was turning an alarming shade of red. You're letting personal feelings compromise your judgment, just like we feared. This proves you're not fit to lead this company. My judgment, Vivian said, her voice dropping to that tone that usually made people reconsider their life choices, is that a company worth running is one that doesn't sacrifice good people to protect bad optics. My judgment is that the 1,500 employees of Crosstech Industries deserve a CEO who treats them like human beings instead of interchangeable resources. And my judgment is that if this board is more concerned with stock prices than with basic human decency, then maybe I'm not the one who's unfit for leadership. This is emotional nonsense, Whitmore said dismissively. You helped this man because you felt sorry for him. That's not leadership, that's sentimentality. Lucas found himself stepping forward before he'd consciously decided to speak. Mr. Whitmore, can I ask you a question? The room went even more silent, if that was possible. A janitor addressing the chairman of the board was apparently unprecedented enough to shock even the most jaded corporate veterans into stillness. I beg your pardon? Whitmore said icily. When was the last time you were inside a Crosstech facility after midnight? Lucas asked. When was the last time you saw what actually happens when everyone else has gone home? Who cleans your offices, maintains your buildings, keeps everything running so you can show up in the morning to buildings that magically function? That's hardly relevant. It's completely relevant, Lucas interrupted, his army training helping him stand straight despite feeling like he might vomit from nerves. Because you're about to fire me to protect a reputation I never asked to threaten. My daughter got sick. Ms. Cross helped. That's the entire story. No scandal, no impropriety, nothing except one human being helping another. And if that's something Crosstech Industries needs to hide, then maybe the problem isn't with me or Ms. Cross. Maybe the problem is with a board that's forgotten what companies are supposed to be for. Companies, Whitmore said with exaggerated patience, are supposed to create value for shareholders. Companies, Lucas countered, are made of people. And when you treat people like they're disposable, when you fire them for needing help, for being human, for having lives outside these walls, you don't create value. You create fear, and fear makes for terrible companies. Patricia Chen cleared her throat delicately. If I might interject, the public response to Ms. Cross's statement has been overwhelmingly positive. Our social media mentions are up 400%, almost all positive. Employee morale, according to our internal surveys, has increased significantly, and our stock price has recovered fully and is actually trending upward. It appears that having a CEO who demonstrates human compassion is actually good for business. That's short-term noise, Whitmore dismissed. Markets are emotional. They'll stabilize and this will all blow over. Or, Patricia continued calmly, it represents a fundamental shift in how employees and consumers view corporate leadership. The data suggests that companies demonstrating authentic care for workers outperform those that don't. This isn't sentiment, Gerald. It's strategic advantage. The use of Whitmore's first name was deliberate, a subtle power play that didn't go unnoticed. Two other board members were nodding now, looking thoughtful rather than hostile. Whitmore stood abruptly, his chair scraping back with enough force to make everyone flinch. I'm calling for a vote. Vivian Cross has demonstrated that her judgment is compromised by personal feelings for this employee. All in favor of a no-confidence motion? 4 hands went up. Whitmore and 3 of his closest allies, all men who'd served under Gerald Cross, and apparently shared his philosophy about corporate ruthlessness. All opposed? Patricia's hand went up immediately. 2 other board members joined her after a brief hesitation, 3 against 4. Not enough to block the motion. Vivian's expression didn't change, but Lucas saw her hands tighten on the back of her chair. They'd lost. The vote would pass. She'd be removed as CEO, probably forcibly bought out of her shares, exiled from the company her father had built. Then one of the older board members, a man Lucas didn't know, someone who'd been silent throughout, raised his hand slowly. Opposed, he said quietly. Robert? Whitmore turned on him. You can't be serious. I'm quite serious, Robert replied. Robert E. Dupats. I watched Gerald Cross build this company, and I watched what that building cost him. His marriage, his health, his relationship with his daughter. And I told myself it was worth it because we were creating something important. But lately I've been wondering, important to who? For what purpose? If we can't show basic humanity to the people who work for us, what exactly are we building? 4-4. A tie. Which meant the motion failed. Whitmore's face was nearly purple now. This is absurd. You're all letting sentiment. We're letting common sense guide us, Patricia interrupted. The data supports keeping both Ms. Cross and Mr. Ward. The public supports it. The employees support it. The only people who don't support it are the ones who can't imagine leading through anything other than fear. Whitmore grabbed his briefcase with shaking hands. This isn't over. I'll be selling my shares and recommending other board members do the same. Crosstech will regret this decision. Perhaps, Vivian said, speaking for the first time since the vote. But I won't. And Gerald, when you sell your shares, do me one favor. Remember that you're selling the company a man built, but you're also selling a company his daughter is finally learning to run her way. I think in the end, that might matter more. Whitmore stormed out, taking one of his allies with him. The remaining board members sat in uncomfortable silence until Patricia spoke. Well, she said with a faint smile. That was dramatic. Shall we discuss actual business now, or do we need more time to process our feelings? The tension broke slightly. People began shuffling papers, reclaiming seats, returning to the familiar rhythms of corporate procedure. Lucas felt suddenly intensely out of place. He'd done what he came to do, helped Vivian find the courage to fight. Now he should leave, return to his world, while she returned to hers. But Vivian's hand on his arm stopped him. Stay, she said quietly. Please. So Lucas stayed through a board meeting where he understood maybe 1 word in 10, where people discussed market strategies and quarterly projections in a language that sounded like English, but operated on rules he'd never learned. But he stayed because Vivian had asked, and because somehow, impossibly, his presence seemed to steady her. When the meeting finally ended 3 hours later, Lucas's legs were numb and his brain was overloaded with corporate jargon. He followed Vivian back to her office in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Narrowly. Uncertainly. Probably temporarily. But they'd won. I need to get back to Queens, Lucas said, checking his phone and seeing 6 messages from Mrs. Chen asking if everything was okay. Mia will be worried. Of course, Vivian said, but she didn't move toward the door, just stood in the middle of her enormous office, looking somehow smaller than she had in the boardroom. Lucas, thank you for coming, for saying what you said, for... She stopped, struggling for words. For reminding you that you're human, Lucas offered gently. For making me want to be human, Vivian corrected. That's different, harder, more expensive. She managed a small smile. I'm not good at this, at feeling things, at caring what happens to people. My father spent a lot of time teaching me not to. Then unlearn it, Lucas said. One day at a time, one decision at a time. You don't have to become someone completely different overnight. You just have to keep choosing to be a little more yourself and a little less him. Vivian nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Could I ask you something? Something that's probably inappropriate and definitely unprofessional? Sure, Lucas said, curious. Would you bring Mia to the office sometime? Not secretly, not hidden away. Just bring her. Let me actually meet the little girl who somehow changed everything without meaning to. Lucas thought about it, about the risk of further blurring boundaries, about whether exposing Mia to Vivian's world was wise. But he also thought about the way Vivian had carried his daughter into that emergency room, the hours she'd spent in uncomfortable chairs, the fact that she'd almost destroyed her career to protect them. Yeah, he said finally. We can do that. Maybe this weekend? I could bring her by, show her where I work, let her meet the woman who saved her life. The doctors saved her life, Vivian said, echoing her words from that night. You answered your phone, Lucas replied, echoing his. When someone like me called someone like you in the middle of the night, you answered, and you came. That's not nothing. They stood looking at each other across the expensive carpet, across the impossible distance between their worlds that had somehow, against all odds, become crossable. I should go, Lucas said finally. I know, Vivian replied, but neither of them moved. Then Lucas did something that probably violated every corporate protocol ever written. He crossed the space between them and pulled Vivian Cross into a brief, fierce hug. She stiffened for a moment, clearly not used to being touched, then relaxed slightly, her hands coming up to rest awkwardly on his back. Thank you, Lucas whispered, for fighting, for staying, for being brave enough to be different from what you were taught to be. When he pulled back, Vivian's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Go home to your daughter, Lucas. Tell her everything's going to be okay. And this time, it'll actually be true. Lucas left, riding the elevator down with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The rain had stopped, leaving Manhattan washed clean and gleaming in afternoon sun. Patricia Chen's driver was waiting, ready to ferry him back to Queens. During the ride, Lucas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a simple message. Contract finalized and signed. You start Monday. Congratulations. Lead Maintenance Supervisor Ward, Patricia Chen. Attached was a PDF of his new contract, officially executed, everything Patricia had promised. Lucas stared at the numbers, the salary that would let him breathe, the benefits that would let Mia see a dentist regularly, the security of knowing he couldn't be fired on a whim. Another message came through, this one from Vivian's number. Thank you for today, for everything. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. V. Lucas typed back, you gave me something I'd stopped believing existed. A boss who sees employees as people. Don't lose that. L. He watched the city slide past. First Manhattan's towers, then the bridge, then the familiar streets of Queens. His neighborhood looked different in the afternoon light, less gray and desperate, more like a place where people built lives instead of just surviving. Mrs. Chen was waiting at his apartment with Mia, who launched herself at Lucas the moment he walked in. Daddy, you're back! Did you fix it? Do you still have your job? Lucas swept his daughter into his arms, spinning her until she giggled. I fixed it, Bug. Better than fixed it. Everything's going to be okay now. Really, truly okay. Mia pulled back to study his face with those serious eyes. You promise? For real this time? For real, Lucas promised, and meant it. That night, after Mia was asleep, after Mrs. Chen had been paid and thanked and had squeezed Lucas's hand with her warm, weathered fingers, Lucas sat on his pull-out couch and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. He'd walked into a board meeting where he didn't belong, had spoken to people who could buy and sell him without thinking, had helped a billionaire CEO remember how to be human, and somehow, impossibly, it had worked. His phone buzzed one more time. Another message from Vivian. "Is Saturday okay? For Mia to visit? I'd like to show her the rooftop garden if the weather's nice." Lucas smiled, typing back, "Saturday works. See you then." Across the river in Manhattan, Vivian Cross stood at her penthouse windows watching the lights of Queens glitter in the darkness. For 36 years, she'd seen that borough as something other, a place where people she'd never meet lived lives she'd never understand. Now she knew at least two people there, a single father and his daughter who'd somehow reminded her that power without humanity was just expensive emptiness. The apartment felt less empty tonight. Her reflection in the glass looked less like her father's ghost and more like someone she might be able to live with. It wasn't salvation, wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain and more precious than anything she'd achieved in 7 years of perfect corporate excellence. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, two people separated by bridges and boroughs, and every imaginable difference found themselves hoping, carefully, that tomorrow might be different from all the yesterdays that had led them here. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, that hope felt justified. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn clarity that made Manhattan look like something from a postcard, all golden light and crisp air, and the sense that anything might be possible. Lucas stood outside Crosstech Tower holding Mia's hand, both of them staring up at the gleaming glass facade that seemed to stretch into infinity. "This is where you work, Daddy?" Mia asked, her voice small with wonder. "It's so tall." "Yeah, Bug," Lucas said, squeezing her hand gently. "This is it. Pretty different from home, huh?" Mia nodded, clutching Mr. Trunks tighter under her other arm. She'd insisted on bringing the stuffed elephant, needing the comfort of something familiar in this strange, towering world. Lucas had dressed her in her nicest outfit, a purple dress with butterfly embroidery that Sarah had bought her 2 birthdays ago, already getting too small but still Mia's favorite. Her hair was pulled back in careful pigtails, and she'd chosen her butterfly clips with solemn deliberation. They entered the lobby together, and Lucas watched his daughter's eyes go wide at the marble floors, the abstract art installations, the fountain in the center that probably cost more than their apartment. Security recognized Lucas this time. Word had apparently spread about the janitor who'd walked into a board meeting and lived to tell the tale, and waved them through with respectful nods. The elevator ride to the 60th floor made Mia's ears pop. She pressed her face against the glass wall, watching the city shrink below them with a mixture of excitement and vertigo. "We're so high up," she whispered. "We're like birds, Daddy." "Like butterflies," Lucas corrected gently, and Mia's face lit up with that smile that still had the power to make his chest ache with love so fierce it bordered on pain. Vivian was waiting in her office, and Lucas saw her stiffen slightly when they entered. She'd dressed differently today, still elegant, but softer somehow. A cashmere sweater instead of her usual severe suit, her hair loose around her shoulders rather than pulled back in that painful-looking braid. She looked younger, more uncertain, almost vulnerable in a way that made Lucas realize how much armor she usually wore. "Ms. Cross," Lucas said formally, then caught himself. "Vivian, this is my daughter, Mia." Mia had gone shy, pressing herself against Lucas's leg while peeking out at Vivian with those careful, assessing eyes. Lucas recognized the look, his daughter evaluating whether this new person was safe, whether she could be trusted, whether she might hurt them. Vivian knelt down slowly, bringing herself to Mia's eye level. The gesture was careful, deliberate, like someone who'd studied the mechanics of interacting with children but never quite mastered the intuition. "Hello, Mia," she said softly. "It's very nice to meet you. Your father has told me a lot about you." "Are you the lady who helped me when I was sick?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vivian's expression softened in a way Lucas had never seen before. "Yes. I'm glad you're feeling better. You gave your dad quite a scare." Mia studied Vivian for another long moment, then made a decision that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than logic. She stepped away from Lucas and wrapped her thin arms around Vivian's neck, hugging her with the fierce, uncomplicated affection that children could still access before the world taught them to be careful with their hearts. Vivian froze, her arms hovering uncertainly, clearly not sure what to do. Then slowly, tentatively, she returned the embrace, one hand coming up to rest gently on Mia's back. When Mia finally pulled away, Vivian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," Mia said seriously, "for helping my daddy keep his job. He was really worried, and I was worried too, but Mrs. Chen said sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them." "Mrs. Chen sounds very wise," Vivian managed, her voice only slightly rough. "She is," Mia agreed. "She's teaching me to make dumplings. Do you know how to make dumplings?" The question was so unexpected, so purely childlike, that Vivian actually laughed. A real laugh, not the calculated social grace she deployed at corporate functions. "No, I don't. I'm not very good at cooking." "That's okay," Mia said generously. "Daddy wasn't good at cooking either when Mommy died, but he learned. He makes really good pasta now, and grilled cheese, and sometimes pancakes, but those are still kind of lumpy." Lucas felt his throat tighten at the casual way Mia mentioned Sarah, at how death had become just another fact in her young life. Vivian must have noticed something in his expression because she stood quickly, offering her hand to Mia. "Would you like to see the rooftop garden?" Vivian asked. "I had it built a few years ago, but I don't visit it often enough. I thought maybe you could help me appreciate it properly." Mia's face transformed with delight. "A garden on the roof? How does that even work?" "Let's go find out," Vivian said, and Lucas watched his daughter slip her small hand into Vivian's with the kind of trust that simultaneously warmed and terrified him. They took a different elevator, smaller and more private, that opened directly onto the rooftop. Lucas had cleaned this space dozens of times but had never truly seen it, had been too focused on his work to notice what the garden actually was. Now, walking through it with Mia's hand in his and Vivian leading the way, he saw it with new eyes. The garden was an oasis suspended 60 stories above Manhattan, carefully cultivated beds of late-blooming flowers, small trees and enormous planters, benches tucked into corners designed for contemplation. And everywhere, designed with what must have been intentional whimsy, were butterfly gardens, plants specifically chosen to attract the monarchs and swallowtails that somehow found their way to this elevated sanctuary. Mia gasped, pulling free from both adults to run toward a patch of purple asters where 3 monarch butterflies were feeding. "Daddy, look! Butterflies! Real butterflies so high up!" "They migrate through here in the fall," Vivian explained quietly, standing beside Lucas. "I don't know if they understand they're 60 floors up, or if they just see the flowers and don't care about the height. But they come every year." "You built this," Lucas said, not quite a question. "My father wanted to use the space for a helipad," Vivian replied, watching Mia try to get close to the butterflies without scaring them away. "Thought it would be efficient, save time commuting. But I'd read a study about how green spaces in urban environments improve employee mental health and productivity. So I argued that a garden would have better ROI. He let me do it as an experiment." "Did it improve productivity?" Lucas asked. "I have no idea," Vivian admitted. "I never actually studied it. I just wanted something beautiful, something alive, something that existed for reasons other than profit." She paused. "I've been up here maybe 6 times in 3 years. Always felt like I was wasting time that could be spent working. But watching your daughter right now, seeing her actually use it the way it was meant to be used, I think maybe I've been wasting time in the wrong places." Mia had found a bench near the butterfly garden and was sitting with Mr. Trunks in her lap, watching the monarchs with rapt attention. Her lips were moving, and Lucas realized she was talking to them, telling them stories in the way she used to tell stories to Sarah in those final hospital days. "She's talking to her mother," Lucas said softly. "Mia believes the butterflies carry messages to people who've died. Sarah told her that before she passed. I don't know if she really believed it or if she was just trying to give Mia something to hold on to." "It's a beautiful belief," Vivian said. "Better than anything I had when my father died." "What did you have?" Lucas asked, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, that's too personal." "Relief?" Vivian interrupted, her voice flat. I had relief. Isn't that terrible? The man who built all this, who gave me everything, who shaped me into who I am. And when he died, all I felt was relief that maybe I could finally breathe without wondering if I was meeting his standards. She moved to a different bench, one that overlooked the city, and Lucas followed, sitting beside her while Mia remained absorbed in her butterfly communion. The day of his funeral, Vivian continued, staring out at Manhattan's impossible skyline, I stood at his grave and tried to cry, thought I should cry. Everyone expects the grieving daughter, right? But I couldn't. I just kept thinking about how he'd told me once that emotions were weaknesses that competitors would exploit, that love was a liability, that the only thing that mattered was the company, the legacy, the numbers that proved your worth. Sounds lonely, Lucas said carefully. It was, Vivian agreed. It is. I have an apartment worth $8 million and I eat dinner alone every night. I have enough money to buy literally anything and no one to share it with. I have power that people spend their whole lives chasing, and it feels like nothing except weight. She turned to look at him, really look at him, her ice blue eyes now warm with something that might have been vulnerability. That night in the emergency room with Mia, those hours of sitting in uncomfortable chairs waiting for her fever to break. That was the first time in 7 years I'd felt like I was doing something that actually mattered. Not for the company, not for shareholders, not for my father's ghost. Just because it was right. Because there was a scared father and a sick little girl, and I had the ability to help. You did help, Lucas said. More than you know. Not just that night, but everything after. You could have let the board push you around, could have fired me and saved yourself. But you fought. You stayed. You chose the hard thing over the easy thing, and that matters, Vivian. That changes things. It almost cost me everything, Vivian pointed out. But it didn't, Lucas countered. You're still here, still CEO, and more than that, you're becoming someone your father never let you be. Someone who cares more about people than profit margins. Someone human. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, watching Mia among the butterflies. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I don't know how to do this, Lucas. How to be the kind of person who has relationships, who lets people in. My father spent 36 years teaching me that caring about people was dangerous, that attachment was weakness. I don't have the instincts for this that normal people have. Then learn them, Lucas said, echoing his words from the boardroom. One day at a time. One choice at a time. You don't have to be perfect at being human. You just have to keep trying. What if I hurt people? Vivian asked. What if I make decisions that seem right but end up being cruel because I don't understand how normal people work? Lucas thought about his answer carefully, knowing it mattered. Then you apologize. You learn from it. You do better next time. That's what everyone else does, Vivian. We all mess up. We all hurt people we care about. The difference is whether you try to do better or whether you give up because trying is hard. Mia appeared suddenly at Vivian's side, making them both jump slightly. Ms. Vivian, can I ask you something? Of course, Vivian said, composing herself quickly. Why don't you come to our apartment for dinner sometime? Mia asked with the straightforward logic of 8-year-olds. Daddy makes really good pasta, and Mrs. Chen could come too, and we could teach you how to make dumplings. It's more fun when there's lots of people. Vivian looked stunned, clearly not having expected this particular invitation. She glanced at Lucas, who found himself nodding despite every instinct that said inviting his boss to his cramped Queen's apartment was crossing about 17 different boundaries. I'd like that, Vivian said softly. Very much. If it's okay with your father. It's okay, Lucas confirmed, meaning it more than he'd expected. How about next Friday? Nothing fancy, just pasta and good company. And dumplings, Mia added enthusiastically. We'll make dumplings for dessert. Mrs. Chen says you can put sweet things inside them too. Then I'll be there, Vivian promised, and something in her expression looked almost like happiness, tentative and uncertain, but real. They spent another hour on the rooftop, Mia showing Vivian every butterfly, every flower, every small miracle of nature that had been transported 60 floors above the city. Vivian listened with genuine attention, asking questions that made Mia feel important and heard in ways that children desperately needed. Lucas watched them together, the billionaire CEO, and the 8-year-old girl bonding over butterflies and stories, and felt something shift in his chest. Not romance exactly, though there was something there, some connection that transcended their vastly different circumstances. More like recognition, like seeing someone who'd been lost finally finding their way towards something that looked like home. When they finally prepared to leave, Mia hugged Vivian again, unself-conscious and warm. "Thank you for showing me your garden," she said, "and for helping my daddy. You're nice. I like you." "I like you too, Mia," Vivian replied, and Lucas could hear that she meant it, that this wasn't corporate politeness, but genuine affection. "I'll see you next Friday for pasta and dumpling making lessons." In the elevator going down, Mia chattered about butterflies and gardens, and how Ms. Vivian seemed lonely, but maybe didn't have to be if people were nice to her. Lucas let his daughter talk, holding her hand and marveling at how children could see through all the complexity to the simple truth underneath. The following week passed in a blur of adjustment. Lucas started his new position as lead maintenance supervisor on Monday, discovering that the promotion came with not just more money, but actual authority, a small office, and a team of 15 people who looked at him like he might actually understand their concerns because he'd been where they were. His first act was implementing Vivian's emergency childcare policy, a protocol that allowed employees to bring their children to work in genuine emergencies, with designated safe spaces and proper supervision. The policy was announced company-wide on Tuesday, and by Wednesday, Lucas's phone was buzzing with messages from employees thanking him, sharing their own stories of impossible choices between work and family. On Thursday, Lucas found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a note in Vivian's precise handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me that policies can be human. The board approved the child care protocol unanimously. Even Whitmore didn't object. Vav." Below the note was a photocopy of an email thread showing the board discussion. Patricia Chen had included data showing that companies with family-friendly policies had lower turnover and higher productivity. But it was Vivian's response that made Lucas's throat tighten. "We're implementing this because it's right, not because the numbers support it. Though I'm glad the numbers support it too." Friday evening arrived with autumn darkness coming early and the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling Lucas's small apartment. He'd spent the afternoon preparing, cleaning spaces that were already clean, arranging their mismatched furniture to somehow accommodate a CEO whose apartment probably had more square footage than his entire building. Mrs. Chen arrived first, carrying bags of dumpling supplies and wearing her nicest cardigan. She'd been thrilled when Mia invited her, had immediately begun planning the menu, taking over Lucas's kitchen with the comfortable authority of someone who'd spent 76 years cooking for people she cared about. Mia was practically vibrating with excitement, having changed her outfit 3 times before settling on her butterfly dress again. She'd made a welcome sign with crayons and construction paper that read, "Welcome to our home, Ms. Vivian," with the misspelling somehow making it more precious. When the knock came at 6 p.m., Mia raced to answer it, pulling open the door to reveal Vivian standing in the dingy hallway, looking more nervous than Lucas had ever seen her. She'd dressed down. Jeans, a simple blouse, boots that probably still cost more than Lucas's monthly salary, but at least weren't obviously designer. She held a bottle of wine that looked expensive, and a box of pastries from a bakery Lucas recognized from magazine articles about Manhattan's elite. "Hi," Mia said, grabbing Vivian's hand and pulling her inside. "You came! We're making dumplings! Mrs. Chen is teaching us!" Vivian's eyes swept the apartment, the pull-out couch, the card table, the clear evidence of people living carefully within constraints. But her expression wasn't pity or condescension. It was something softer, almost wistful, like she was seeing something she'd never known existed and realizing she'd been missing it. "Thank you for inviting me," Vivian said, handing Lucas the wine and Mia the pastries. "Your home is lovely." It wasn't, objectively, but the way she said it made Lucas believe she meant it anyway. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and studied Vivian with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So you are the boss lady," she said in her accented English, "the one who almost fired Mr. Ward then changed her mind." "Mrs. Chen," Lucas started, mortified. "It's okay," Vivian interrupted, meeting Mrs. Chen's gaze directly. "Yes, I'm that person, and I'm very glad I changed my mind." Mrs. Chen nodded once, apparently satisfied by whatever she'd seen in Vivian's face. "Good. Now come. We make dumplings. You have rich people hands, never work hard, but dumplings don't care. They teach humility. Vivian laughed, a real surprised laugh, and followed Mrs. Chen into the tiny kitchen. Lucas opened the wine, poured it into mismatched glasses, and tried not to think about how surreal this was. The dumpling-making lesson was chaos and laughter and flour everywhere. Mrs. Chen demonstrated the technique with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands working the dough like she'd done it 10,000 times. Mia tried to copy her, creating dumplings that were lumpy and lopsided but made with such concentration that no one dared criticize them. Vivian was terrible at it. Her first attempts fell apart immediately, the dough tearing, the filling spilling out. But instead of getting frustrated or giving up, she kept trying, accepting Mrs. Chen's corrections with genuine gratitude and laughing at her own mistakes in a way Lucas suspected she'd never allowed herself before. "Like this," Mrs. Chen said patiently, taking Vivian's hands and guiding them through the motion. "Gentle but firm. You must respect the dumpling, but also show it who is boss." "I'm not sure the dumpling respects me," Vivian said ruefully, looking at her latest failed attempt. "The dumpling respect persistence," Mrs. Chen replied. "Try again." They worked together for an hour, the small kitchen crowded with 4 people, but somehow not feeling cramped, just full of warmth and conversation and the simple pleasure of making something together. When the dumplings were finally ready, they carried plates to the card table, which Lucas had covered with a clean sheet to make it look more presentable. The pasta was simple, just butter and parmesan and garlic, but it smelled like home. The dumplings were a mix of beautiful and disastrous, but they tasted perfect. They ate together, squeezed around the small table, and talked about everything and nothing. Mia told stories about school, about her friends, about the butterflies she'd found on the playground that she was convinced had a message from her mother. Mrs. Chen shared stories about coming to America 50 years ago, about building a life from nothing, about the husband she still missed every day. And Vivian, slowly at first and then with growing ease, talked about her own life, about growing up in a mansion that felt like a museum, about a father who loved her in theory but couldn't seem to like her in practice, about the weight of inheriting a company at 29 and spending the next 7 years trying to prove she deserved it. "But what do you like to do?" Mia asked with childlike directness. "Like, for fun. What makes you happy?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I don't think I've thought about that in a very long time. Maybe ever." "That's sad," Mia said with brutal honesty. "Everyone should have things that make them happy. I like butterflies and art, and when Daddy reads me stories and Mrs. Chen's dumplings. What about you?" "I like today," Vivian said softly, "on the rooftop with the butterflies. And I'm liking right now, this dinner with all of you. Maybe that's enough to start with." "It's a good start," Mrs. Chen agreed. "Happy is practice, not destination. You practice every day, get better at it." After dinner, Mia insisted on showing Vivian her room, pulling her by the hand to the small space that held a twin bed, a bookshelf from Goodwill, and walls covered in butterfly drawings. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed while Mia explained each picture, each library book, each small treasure that made up her world. Lucas watched from the doorway, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. There was something profound happening here, something that went beyond a CEO being kind to an employee's daughter. Vivian was learning how to be a person again, and Mia, with all her 8-year-old wisdom, was teaching her. When Mia finally started yawning, Lucas intervened. "Okay, Bug, time for bed. It's way past your bedtime." "But Ms. Vivian just got here," Mia protested, then yawned again, betraying her exhaustion. "I'll come visit again," Vivian promised, "if that's okay with your dad." "More than okay," Lucas said, meaning it. He tucked Mia in while Vivian and Mrs. Chen cleaned up in the kitchen. When he emerged, Mrs. Chen was putting on her coat, preparing to head across the hall to her own apartment. "Good dinner," Mrs. Chen said, patting Lucas's arm. "Good people." She looked at Vivian meaningfully. "You come back. You need this family as much as they need you." After Mrs. Chen left, Lucas and Vivian stood in the small living room, suddenly alone together for the first time all evening. The apartment felt different without Mia's energy filling it. Smaller, more intimate, charged with something Lucas couldn't quite name. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "For tonight, for letting me be part of this." "Thank you for coming," Lucas replied, "for being willing to sit at a card table and eat with people who have no idea what it's like to be you." "That's exactly why I needed to come," Vivian said, "because I have no idea what it's like to be you either. To have this," she gestured around the small apartment, "and somehow make it feel like more than all my space and money ever has." She moved to the window, looking out at the street below. "I meant what I said at dinner. I don't know what makes me happy. My father trained that out of me, or maybe I never learned it to begin with. But tonight, making terrible dumplings and listening to Mia's stories and watching you and Mrs. Chen take care of each other, I felt something. Not happiness, maybe, but the possibility of happiness. Like if I kept practicing, like Mrs. Chen said, maybe eventually I'd get better at it." Lucas joined her at the window, their reflections ghostly in the glass. "You're already better at it than you think. You came here tonight. You let yourself be bad at dumpling making. You listened to an 8-year-old like what she had to say actually mattered. Those aren't small things, Vivian. Those are brave things." "I don't feel brave," Vivian admitted. "I feel terrified, like I'm trying to learn a language everyone else speaks fluently and I've only just discovered exists." "Then keep learning," Lucas said. "Keep showing up. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the street below where people moved through their Friday evening lives. After a while, Vivian spoke again. "I told the board yesterday that I want to start an employee assistance program. Subsidized childcare, mental health resources, emergency financial support. Patricia ran the numbers and said it would cost about $2 million a year to implement properly." "That's a lot of money," Lucas said carefully. "It's nothing," Vivian countered. "It's executive bonus money. It's the cost of one failed marketing campaign. It's a rounding error in our quarterly budget. But for people like you, like your coworkers, it could mean the difference between keeping your home and losing it, between getting help for a sick child and watching them suffer, between having hope and drowning in desperation." She turned to face him fully. "I'm implementing it regardless of what the board says. And if they don't like it, if they vote me out, then I'll know I went down fighting for something that actually mattered. You taught me that. In that boardroom when you stood up to Whitmore, you showed me that sometimes the only way to know who you are is to fight for what you believe in, even when you're terrified." Lucas felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Vivian, I'm not finished," she interrupted, her ice blue eyes intense. "I also want you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it scares me more than any boardroom battle ever has, because I don't know how to be friends with someone. I don't know how to care about people without calculating the cost. And I especially don't know how to—" She stopped abruptly, seeming to catch herself. "How to what?" Lucas asked softly. Vivian looked away, her composure cracking just slightly. "How to feel something for someone that goes beyond gratitude or professional respect. My father taught me that caring about people made you vulnerable, that attachment was a liability. And I'm trying to unlearn that, but, Lucas, I don't even know what I'm feeling half the time. I just know that when I'm with you and Mia, I feel less empty, less like I'm just going through the motions of a life someone else designed for me." Lucas's heart was pounding now, the apartment suddenly feeling too small and too large all at once. "I don't know what this is either," he admitted. "I just know that you saved my daughter's life, that you fought for me when you didn't have to, that you're trying so hard to be different from what you were taught to be, and that courage matters to me. You matter to me. You and Mia, you've given me hope that maybe good people still exist in positions of power, that maybe the world isn't as broken as I thought it was." They stood close now, close enough that Lucas could see the flecks of gray in Vivian's blue eyes, could see the vulnerability she was trying so hard to show him despite her training telling her to hide it. "I don't know how to do this," Vivian whispered. "How to have people in my life who matter, how to be someone worth mattering to." "You're already doing it," Lucas said gently. "You're here, aren't you? In Queens, in my apartment, making dumplings with my daughter. You're trying. That's enough." Vivian nodded slowly, something like relief crossing her face. "Can I keep coming back? Keep learning how to be human from you and Mia and Mrs. Chen?" Yes, Lucas said simply. As often as you want. You're always welcome here. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty and the tentative beginnings of something neither could quite name. Then Vivian smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine and completely unlike the Ice Queen persona she showed the rest of the world. I should go, she said. It's late, and you have to work tomorrow. So do you, Lucas pointed out. Yes, but I get to arrive at a building I own. You have to work for a demanding CEO who's still figuring out how to be decent. She's getting better at it, Lucas said with a slight smile. Give her time. Vivian collected her coat, paused at the door. Thank you, Lucas, for tonight, for everything, for seeing past what I was and helping me figure out who I might become. Thank you for being willing to become it, Lucas replied. After she left, Lucas stood in his quiet apartment feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his universe. He thought about Vivian driving back to Manhattan, to her $8 million penthouse that felt empty. Thought about how money and power could give you everything except what actually mattered. He pulled out his phone and sent her a text. Made it home okay? Her response came quickly. Yes. Thank you for checking. Still thinking about Mrs. Chen's dumpling wisdom. She's right. Happy is practice. I'm going to keep practicing. Lucas smiled, typing back, So will I. See you Monday, boss. See you Monday. And Lucas, stop calling me boss when we're texting. Just Vivian is fine. Okay, see you Monday, just Vivian. He could almost hear her laugh through the phone. Good night, Lucas. Good night, Vivian. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its ordinariness. Vivian came to Queens twice a week, sometimes for dinner with Lucas and Mia and Mrs. Chen, sometimes just to sit in their small living room and read while Mia did homework. She learned to make decent dumplings, helped Mia with an art project about butterflies, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shed the armor she'd worn for 36 years. At work, Lucas saw the changes rippling through Crosstech. The Employee Assistance Program launched to overwhelming response, with hundreds of workers accessing resources they desperately needed but never thought to ask for. Vivian began making surprise visits to different departments, not to inspect or criticize, but to listen, to understand what her employees actually needed. The board grumbled about costs and efficiency, but the numbers told a story they couldn't ignore. Turnover dropped by 30%. Productivity increased. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and the press coverage of Crosstech's human-centered leadership approach was generating more positive attention than any marketing campaign ever had. 3 months after that first dinner in Queens on a cold January evening, Vivian arrived at Lucas's apartment looking different, lighter somehow, less burdened. She'd cut her hair shorter, started wearing colors other than black and gray, and had begun to look like someone who was learning to inhabit her own life instead of just performing it. They'd developed an easy companionship by then, the kind that didn't require constant conversation but was comfortable in silence. That evening, after Mia was asleep and Mrs. Chen had returned to her apartment, Lucas and Vivian sat on his pull-out couch drinking tea and watching snow fall past the windows. I sold my father's penthouse today, Vivian said suddenly, the one I've been living in, all his furniture, all his art, everything that screamed Gerald Cross. Lucas looked at her in surprise. Where will you live? I found a smaller place, Vivian said, in Brooklyn. Still nice, but actually my size, with space for furniture I choose, colors I like, maybe even a small garden on the balcony. Patricia thinks I'm insane, says the Manhattan address is part of my brand. What do you think? Lucas asked. I think brands are for products, not people, Vivian replied. I think I've spent enough of my life living in my father's shadow, and I think, she paused, turning to look at Lucas directly, I think I want to live somewhere that feels closer to the people who actually matter to me, closer to here. Lucas's breath caught slightly. Vivian, I'm not expecting anything, she said quickly. I know this is complicated. I'm still your boss, still learning how to be a functional human being, still unpacking 36 years of emotional damage. But I wanted you to know that this, she gestured around the small apartment, at the life Lucas had built, has become more important to me than any penthouse or corporate office ever was. You and Mia have given me something I didn't know I was missing. You've given me hope that maybe I can be someone worth being." Lucas set down his tea, reaching out to take Vivian's hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away. "You're already someone worth being," he said quietly. "You just had to stop trying to be who your father wanted and start being who you actually are." "And who am I?" Vivian asked, her voice vulnerable. "Someone brave enough to change," Lucas replied. "Someone strong enough to admit weakness. Someone who makes terrible dumplings but keeps trying because a little girl thinks she should learn. Someone who gave up everything she was taught to value to protect a janitor and his daughter. You're someone good, Vivian, someone worth knowing." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, a sight that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago, and she leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her while she cried quietly, releasing years of carefully controlled emotion. "Thank you," she whispered when the tears finally stopped. "For seeing me. For being patient while I figured out how to be myself. For not giving up on me even when I'd given up on myself." "Thank you," Lucas replied, "for answering your phone that night, for caring enough to help when you didn't have to, for proving that good people can exist anywhere, even in corner offices and boardrooms." They sat together while snow continued to fall, two people from impossibly different worlds who'd somehow found their way to this moment, this quiet evening in a small Queens apartment where happiness turned out to be simpler than either had imagined. Spring came with sudden warmth and the return of butterflies to Vivian's rooftop garden. On a Saturday in late April, Lucas and Mia met Vivian there for a garden party she'd organized, not a corporate function, but a genuine celebration for Crosstech employees and their families. The rooftop was full of children playing, parents relaxing, workers actually enjoying the space that had been built for them. Lucas watched Mia show other children the butterflies, explaining with serious 8-year-old authority about migration patterns and which flowers attracted which species. Watched Mrs. Chen holding court with a group of employees' grandparents, everyone laughing at her stories. Watched Vivian moving through the crowd, no longer the distant ice queen, but someone who knew people's names, asked about their children, listened to their concerns with genuine interest. Patricia Chen found Lucas by the edge of the garden, looking out over Manhattan's sprawling landscape. "Quite a transformation," she said, following his gaze toward Vivian. 6 months ago, she would have delegated this event to HR and never attended. "Now look at her." "People can change," Lucas said simply. "Some people can," Patricia corrected. "Most don't. Most just become more of what they already are. But Vivian, she's becoming someone completely different, better, more human. And I don't think that happens without the right catalyst." She looked at Lucas meaningfully. "Thank you, Mr. Ward, for being whatever she needed you to be, for showing her that power doesn't have to mean isolation, that success doesn't require sacrificing your soul. Crosstech is better because you're here. Vivian is better because you're here." "She did the hard work herself," Lucas said. "I just reminded her it was possible." "Sometimes that's exactly what people need," Patricia replied. "Someone to believe in them until they can believe in themselves." As the afternoon stretched into evening, as the party wound down and families began to leave, Lucas found himself standing with Vivian at the edge of the rooftop, watching the sun set over Manhattan in shades of gold and rose. "I've been thinking," Vivian said, her hand finding his naturally now, their fingers intertwining with the ease of practice, "about what Mrs. Chen said, about happy being practice." "Yeah," Lucas prompted. "I think I'm getting better at it," Vivian continued, "at being happy, at letting myself care about people, about letting people care about me, at building a life instead of just surviving one." She turned to face him, her expression open in a way that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "I'm still not good at this. At relationships, at vulnerability, at all the things normal people learn when they're young. But I'm learning. And I wanted you to know that I'm—" She took a breath, gathering courage. "I'm falling in love with you. With your daughter, with Mrs. Chen and your apartment and the life you've built from nothing except determination and dignity. And that terrifies me, but it also makes me hopeful in ways I never thought I could be." Lucas's heart was pounding, but his voice stayed steady. "I'm falling in love with you too," he admitted, "with who you're becoming, with how hard you're working to unlearn everything your father taught you, With the way you look at Mia like she's precious, with your terrible dumpling-making skills and your willingness to keep trying anyway. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't know what this becomes, Vivian. I don't know how we navigate the complications of you being my boss, of our lives being so different, of all the reasons this shouldn't work. But I know I want to try. I know that what we have is worth fighting for. So we fight, Vivian said simply. We keep practicing at being happy. We keep showing up for each other. We keep building something real, even when it's messy and complicated and imperfect. Even when it's imperfect, Lucas agreed. They stood together as the sun set, as butterflies returned to their evening roosts, as the city transformed from day to night. Behind them, Mia was drawing a picture of the garden, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Around them, the space hummed with the afterglow of celebration, of community, of people coming together. Below them, Manhattan sprawled in all its complicated glory, millions of stories intersecting, millions of lives being lived in quiet desperation or loud triumph, or most commonly, in the space between where people just tried to survive and sometimes, if they were lucky, found moments of grace. Lucas thought about where he'd been 6 months ago, fired, desperate, convinced that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. Thought about the day Vivian Cross had said, "You're fired," and he'd walked out with dignity instead of anger. That moment had changed everything, had cracked something open in both of them, had started them on paths that led here, to this rooftop garden where a billionaire CEO and a maintenance supervisor stood hand in hand watching the sunset. "Thank you," Lucas said softly. "For what?" Vivian asked. "For being different than I thought you were, for proving that people in power can choose kindness, for showing my daughter that the world still has good people in it, even in the places where you'd least expect to find them." "Thank you," Vivian replied, "for not letting me give up on myself, for believing I could be more than my father made me, for giving me a reason to become someone worth being." Mia ran up to them, her drawing clutched in her hands. "Look, I drew all of us. There's Daddy and Miss Vivian and me and Mrs. Chen and all the butterflies." The picture was pure 8-year-old art, figures with stick bodies and oversized heads, butterflies that looked more like colorful blobs, but rendered with such love that it was beautiful anyway. In Mia's drawing, they all held hands, connected in an unbroken chain beneath a sky full of butterflies carrying messages to heaven. "It's perfect," Vivian said, and meant it. "Can I keep it?" she asked Mia. "To put in my new apartment?" Mia beamed. "Yes, it's for you. So you remember that you're part of our family now." Vivian's eyes went bright with tears again, but this time they were tears of joy rather than grief. She knelt down to hug Mia, holding her with the kind of fierce tenderness that came from finally understanding what love actually was. "I'll treasure it forever," Vivian promised, "just like I'll treasure all of you." As they left the rooftop that evening, Lucas and Mia and Vivian walking together toward the elevator, the butterflies settled into their evening quiet, and somewhere in that high garden above Manhattan, miracles became ordinary. Because that's what had happened, really. Not a fairy tale transformation or a dramatic rescue, but something quieter and more profound. Two people from different worlds had seen each other's humanity and decided it mattered more than the distance between them, had chosen to build bridges instead of maintaining walls, had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself care about someone, even when everything in your history tells you caring is dangerous. Vivian Cross would never be perfect at being human. She'd spent too many years learning the opposite, and some lessons left scars that never quite healed. But she kept practicing, kept showing up, kept choosing connection over isolation. Lucas Ward would never stop carrying the weight of raising his daughter alone, of losing his wife too young, of knowing how quickly stability could evaporate. But he'd learned that hope wasn't foolish, that sometimes good things did happen to people like him, that dignity and determination could occasionally be enough. And Mia, beautiful, brave Mia, with her butterfly obsession and her 2 old eyes, would grow up knowing that the world had both cruelty and kindness, that powerful people could be good, that her father had fought for her and won, that miracles were possible when you least expected them. The months became a year, then 2. Crosstech Industries thrived under Vivian's increasingly human leadership, becoming known not just for profit margins, but for actually caring about employees. The Employee Assistance Program expanded, saving dozens of families from financial disaster. The company started winning awards for workplace culture, for innovative benefits, for being the kind of corporation that proved business and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Lucas and Vivian navigated their complicated relationship with care and patience, building something solid from the unlikely foundation of a firing that had become a beginning instead of an ending. They moved slowly, mindfully, always aware of Mia's needs, of workplace appropriateness, of the thousand ways their story could go wrong if they weren't careful. But mostly, it went right. They became a family, Lucas and Mia and Vivian and even Mrs. Chen, who declared herself honorary grandmother to everyone involved. Not a perfect family, but a real one, built on choice and effort and the daily practice of caring about each other. And on spring evenings when butterflies returned to the rooftop garden, you could find them there together. Mia pointing out monarchs to children who'd never seen them before. Lucas maintaining the garden with the same dedication he'd once brought to invisible janitorial work. Vivian watching them both with an expression that was no longer ice but warmth, no longer distance but presence. No longer the carefully constructed mask of someone who'd forgotten how to feel, but the open face of someone who'd finally remembered. The city sprawled below them, indifferent and enormous. But 60 floors up, in a garden that shouldn't exist but did. 4 people who shouldn't have come together but had proved that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, the world still had space for grace, for transformation, for second chances, for hope. For the quiet miracle of humans learning to be human again, one dumpling and one butterfly and one sunset at a time. And that, in the end, was enough.